What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto Jenova sells? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. 6 years later, Shinra Corporation. A single figure stood impatiently at the door of the laboratory, his glowing emerald eyes carefully surveying all that the room held. There was no telling what kind of dangerous artifacts and creatures the bastard Hojo kept here, though his superhuman senses had assured him that it is safe to venture within, for now. He was handsome, though a little too cold. Long white hairs cascaded down his back, and twin bangs hang before his sharply chiseled face, casting his unnatural eyes into shadows. The man wore a long black trench coat, and upon it was set 2 metallic shoulder guards, though they were only there for show. Beneath the coat, the warrior wore black leather pants and boots, and no shirt. The ebony coat seemed to be secured in place via several straps. A single nodashi of ridiculous length hung loosely from the man's waist, a giant of a sword that seemed to be around 6 feet in length, perhaps more. His name is Sephiroth, and he is the commander of the Soldier, an organization of genetically enhanced superhumans that acted as enforcers and executioners for Shinra. Though only 20 of age, the name of Sephiroth has attained legendary status, thanks to his exploits in the Wutai Midgar War, in which he had won many a battle almost single-handedly. Already, he has replaced his mentor, the late Zeon, as the #1 swordsman in the world. However, that was all in the past. Right now, Sephiroth felt more than a little annoyance at the late Hojo, who still had not shown up. In fact, if not for the fact that Hojo is still an important member of Shinra, Sephiroth would have been more than willing to sever the scientist in two. "Ah, Commander Sephiroth." The voice sounded behind him, a voice full of treachery and deceit. It was like dealing with a slippery snake. "It is a pleasure to see you." At this, the commander turned to face the scientist, a dangerous glint in his eyes. The man before him is somewhat short, and slightly repulsive to look up. It was not because Hojo is particularly ugly, but rather the way he moved, the way he spoke, and the way he generally carried himself made many people feel rather uncomfortable around the deranged scientist. Sephiroth counted himself one of those people, though he could hide his displeasures with ease. It was one of the things he had picked up on the battlefield. A soldier with emotion is a dead soldier. "Skip the pleasantries," the silver-haired swordsman growled. The malice in his voice made even Hojo a little afraid. After all, this was a man who had decimated entire squadrons with careless grace. "I wanted to know why you have asked for my presence. Keep in mind you have only 2 minutes to explain yourself before I lose my patience." Hojo nodded. He kept forgetting that dealing with Sephiroth is not at all like dealing with the other, less powerful members of Shinra. If he had wanted to, the soldier commander could have taken Hojo's own head without much repercussion. Besides, there are always the ambitious individuals who would have applauded at the scientist's unfortunate demise. "This way, Commander," he said, showing a level of respect he had rarely needed to call upon. "This concern an experiment entrusted to me by your teacher, the previous soldier commander 6 years ago, 1 year before this foolhardy war had started." At this, Sephiroth raised an ivory eyebrow. A legacy of his late mentor? This is indeed unusual. Zeon had never mentioned anything of this sort to him when he had entrusted Sephiroth with his position. "Yes," Hojo continued, unaware of the questions in Sephiroth's mind, "and if I do say so myself, it is one of the most successful projects I have had the pleasure of overseeing. In fact, the specimen displays an excellence in battle rivaled perhaps only by yourself." This statement caught Sephiroth's full attention. Now here is something interesting indeed. An experiment that produced a creature with his level of combatability? Perhaps Hojo is not as useless as he first had thought. "Really?" Sephiroth's face betrayed none of the emotions he had felt. "Are you quite certain?" Hojo shrugged as he led Sephiroth deeper into his laboratory. "To be honest, I am not sure. Most of the trials the specimen underwent during our testing are mere computer simulations. However, the data suggest that if there are no overt complications, the specimen should perform as we expected it to." Pausing a while to draw breath, the scientist continued. "Of course, the specimen's battle ability is severely hampered by his age and his strength, although with time, we should be able to overcome these difficulties." "His age?" Sephiroth frowned at this new revelation. Hojo smirked as he turned to the soldier commander. "Did I forget to mention?" he asked with feigned innocence. This specimen of mine just turned 6 this year. Sephiroth watched the scene unfolding before him with a mixture of anticipation and surprise. The child, for what else could he call the boy within the test tube, is a genius of a fighter, that much was for sure. Never once in the simulation battle that he had witnessed, did the child show any sigh of irritation, fear, excitement, or any other emotion that could disrupt one's judgment. The boy fought with the precision and calculating pace of a first-class soldier, and the mercilessness of a killer born. Each of his blows was designed to cause the maximum harm to the opponent, or to give himself the greatest advantage. Never once in the battle did the child give in to the battle lust Sephiroth had known so well. This is not just a killer, Sephiroth realized, this is a machine of war. An emotionless, unfeeling creature bred for destruction. What do you think of my most brilliant creation? Hojo asked, a superior smile upon his features. Sephiroth could not help but agree. The man may be a slimy bastard, but his brilliance is not to be denied. Very impressive, he nodded. Give him a few years, and he may become one of the most powerful soldier in history. His Mako-infused eyes bore into Hojo's own. Provided, of course, that you have subjected him to the same treatment as the rest of us. The scientist chuckled. Very observant, Commander Sephiroth. Of course, the boy had been injected with Mako. I would not have my specimen at any form of disadvantage. Sephiroth stood up and walked over to the container that now held the sleeping form of the child. Did you just call him a boy? How strange that you show such sympathy to your own experimentations. He asked, staring intently at the soft features of the future soldier. Or have you gone soft these past few years? Hojo's chuckle turned into full-blown laughter, a sinister and chilling laugh. I do not deny that I have some sort of attachment to this particular specimen. He admitted, it is the longest project I have worked on since leaving Professor Gast. As he said that, he punched in a few keys on the control panel before him, causing several screens to change the data they displayed. But I hardly regard it as anything more than an experiment. An interesting experiment, mind, but an experiment still. Sephiroth said nothing as he regarded Hojo with those Mako-infused eyes. Eyes that seemed to be able to pierce a man's very soul. Enough of this foolish debate, Hojo. He spoke slowly, a hint of impatience marring his normally calm and collected voice. Tell me why you have brought me here. I am quite certain it is not to gloat your work in front of me. The mad scientist laughed again, his voice all the more deranged as he then spoke. Certainly not, Commander. You know me too well for that. He admitted. Well, it was fun while it lasted. You see, this experiment is not yet perfected. The specimen performed outstandingly in the battle simulations we ran, but I have no idea how it will react in the real world. Adjusting his glasses, Hojo continued. So I ask you this favor, take the boy under your wing and train him. Consider it as the final step of this project. At this, he smiled an even more unsettling smile. Besides, I am rather eager to see how the boy will perform against the Wutai soldiers that have troubled Shinra for so long. Sephiroth's grip on his blade tightened as he came face to face with Hojo. There was killer intent in his eyes, and for a moment, Hojo had though his life would have been forfeited. One does not ask such trivial matter of the soldier commander himself, even if the said matter is quite important in Hojo's opinion. The Sephiroth spoke, and the unnatural silence between them shattered. Very well, Hojo, he growled. Consider this a favor rendered. With that, the commander stalked out of the metallic sliding door, his trench coat billowing behind him. Naruto said nothing as he followed the silver-haired man. The curiosity and the cheerfulness of a normal 6 years old not at all present upon his childish face. Then again, when you have slaughtered thousands of enemies, such things are stripped of you. Naruto knew his purpose, as it had been made clear by Hojo, the scientist charged with overseeing his conditions. He was not a child to be loved or to be pampered, like some of the children he had seen on the television that Hojo sometimes allowed him to watch. They were soft, weak, and useless. They could not last a day outside their parents' care. They were pathetic, wasteful, and ultimately just another link in the food chain. He is a machine born of destruction, and designed to kill. The Mako injections that he had received regularly have already dulled his emotions to the point where fear and anger, pain and joy are abstract concepts for the young specimen. More than once the specimen had wondered, what did happiness feel like? Why did those children smile, when he saw nothing to smile about? Then again, it took a human to answer those questions. Naruto was quite sure, after a few of Hojo's rumblings, that he was no longer human. Not by a long shot. And so, he followed Sephiroth without complaint, without question, when the silver-haired warrior informed him of the transaction that took place. If he could grow stronger under Sephiroth, then so be it. After all, this is his purpose. This is the fate of those who are denied life. They passed winding halls and dimly lit chambers, until finally, Sephiroth stopped in front of what seemed to be the entrance of a forgery. Not just any forgery, mind you. Within this forge is Shinra technology at its finest. Everything from biometallic weapons to thermo-denote explosives could be found in this little shop of wonders and horrors. Not that Sephiroth or Naruto cared. In this regard, they are quite similar. Both are willing to achieve a goal through whatever means necessary. Nothing mattered before that. "Hello, Commander." A large man looked surprised as he came out of the forge. He was an imposing-looking man, a large beard that reached the base of his neck, hair combed in a military fashion, and a scar near his right eyes. The man carried himself with an air of self-importance, and looked like he had been a formidable warrior in his youth. Though judging from the birth of the man, it seems that he had not been in active combat for quite some time. Sephiroth returned the greeting with a curt nod. He did not like wasting any more time than he could. He had come to the forgery for one thing only, and that is that. "Greetings, Heidegger," he replied coolly. "Step aside, please. I have come on business. I am certain that we can catch up on the pleasantries of the day later, when I have relieved myself of my duty." "Eh?" Heidegger, the head of Shinra's Public Safety Maintenance Department, asked. He knew Sephiroth by reputation if by nothing else, and was not surprised by the cold greeting he had received. Most soldiers are like that, completely emotionless, robotic, almost. Mako may have given them superhuman powers, but it also took away the feelings that made a person human in the first place. "Duty? Ah, I see." His attention was finally drawn to the boy that followed Sephiroth silently. One look at the boy's eyes, however, and Heidegger could not help but shiver a little. Unlike Sephiroth, the boy is complete and utterly inhuman. There is no trace of anything even remotely akin to emotion within those eyes, and that is saying a lot. As the head of Shinra's military branch of power, Heidegger prided himself on seeing underneath the underneath. He could read most people like a blank sheet of paper, just by making eye contact with them. Most people had assumed, when they first saw the large and somewhat crude man, that Heidegger is another one of those people who is, as they say, all brawn and no brains. Most people were sadly mistaken. Hell, Heidegger could even extract bits and pieces of Sephiroth if he tried really hard. But not this boy. In the child. Could this really be given the title of a child? Heidegger could see no more than two empty voids, threatening to consume the larger man if he stayed there any longer. "What the hell is wrong with the boy?" he asked, thoroughly unnerved by those feeling less eyes. Sephiroth looked at the man and smirked, enjoying the fear that danced in Heidegger's eyes. Hojo's experimentation, I would presume. Though to what extent is anyone's guess. An understanding dawned upon the head of security's face. He should have known. After all, Hojo is the only one brilliant enough, and the only scientist with a complete and utter disregard for morality in all its forms, to have attempted something like this. "I see. Well, carry on," he said with a nod as he walked away, leaving the soldier and the specimen to their respective silence once again. Sephiroth looked somewhat surprised as the boy held the Nodashi in his hands. It was shorter than his Masamune, but wider, about 5 or 6 feet in length. Judging from its size, it should be rather heavy, though the child seems to be able to wield the blade in one hand with relative ease. True, using the sword and holding the sword was two completely different things, but Sephiroth did not doubt that in 2 years' time, the boy could become a master swordsman with the weapon. Though would the boy succeed him, is another matter entirely. "Is this the weapon you want?" he asked in a voice of indifference. Granted, it made his teaching easier, since the weapon is so similar to his own. But not by much, since Sephiroth had made a point to master other fighting style as well. The boy only nodded. Why? This is an important question. For most soldier, a weapon is far more than a tool of killing. The weapon defined their style, their speed, their strength, and their materia arrangements. It could almost be said that it is the weapon that made the soldier. Besides, for a soldier, the weapon also becomes his trademark. When engaged with a soldier, one could almost always tell his or her identity just from the weapon they used. Speed, strength, accuracy, came the simple reply. The boy's voice was soft, and showed no sign of disuse. Sephiroth nodded to himself. It was a good answer, and way beyond what someone of his age should know. Indeed, the sword in the boy's hand seemed a perfect balance of all three, once the child's strength has fully developed. Very well, he said with a nonchalant shrug. If this is the type of weapon you wish to wield, then we shall find a proper smith and forge you one. His only response is silence. The boy knew that these weapons served only as models, and the real weapons of the soldier were forged and customized individually, according to their strength and weakness. It was a shame that he could not wield his chosen blade at this moment, but he supposed it was a small loss compared to the quality of the weapon he would soon receive. And so, wordlessly, Naruto followed Sephiroth as they exited the room, the metallic door closing with hiss behind them. 2 years later, unnamed battlefield. Naruto watched the watch with calculating eyes. No fear or hesitation wormed its way into the boy's eyes as he scanned the area all around him. So far, he could detect at least 2 different groups moving about his location, one of them Shinra's troops, but the second. With a soundless leap, Naruto sailed over the tree branches and landed next to one of the Shinra soldier. While the boy had not yet mastered the art of flight like his mentor, he could glide a good distance when he set his mind to it. "Nah, Naruto sir." The Shinra troop gave an estranged yelp, which was ended when Naruto placed a hand over the man's mouth. He would not have been able to do this, if not for the fact the man was currently in a crouching position. The man recognized Naruto at once. After all, many are the time when he or another Shinra soldier had seen the blonde child in the company of Sephiroth. At first, the men had speculated among themselves whether or not their esteemed commander had certain, unique taste, of course. That soon ended when they saw the 8-year-old youth calmly and emotionlessly wipe out an entire squadron of soldiers with a single spell. Then they realized that Sephiroth had taken Naruto under his wing, not because of anything unmentionable, but for the simple fact that the child is very much like the soldier commander, a monster born. Silence. The voice of Naruto may sound childish, but his tone is able to still the most fearless of men. There is another squad of Wutai nearby. Gather your men and take them out. I trust you will be able to handle these soldiers without much problem. The man nodded, still not daring to utter a sound. Sephiroth may be a monster, but at least he is one with feeling. The child on the other hand, it seems almost as if the boy is not even human. Soundlessly, Naruto left the man, who had no idea how close to the truth he had gotten. You could have eliminated the Wate yourself. From the back of his mind, a voice just as cold as his own, replied. Naruto smiled, and shook his head before he addressed the demon fox sealed within his soul. Not a happy smile, but a smile that promised much pain and suffering. I am not powerful enough, physically. Even with the strength you provided, I could barely able to swing my blade, Muramasa. He replied out loud to his fox companion, since there is no one to overhear them. I would have been defeated. If I use magic, it would be sufficient to eliminate the group, but will also draw needless attention. Since the age of 5, Naruto had known about the existence of another entity within the chamber of his mind. Yet like Naruto, the fox had changed as well by the Mako contamination. Much of his bloodthirsty and evil nature had been worn away, resulting in a persona very much like that of Naruto's own, complete and utterly impassive to all things. The only difference between them is that Kyuubi seems to show a greater preference to violence than his host, though not by much. Of course, there are advantages to have a 1,000-years-old demon within your soul as well. For one thing, Kyuubi has a much sharper sense than Naruto, and could provide the boy with accurate information on enemy locations, distance, and more. Also, despite the fact that the great demon is just as alien to the world of Gaia as Naruto, he could still prove to be a valuable source of advice. Besides, he kept Naruto company during many of the missions. True, the Mako-infested fox is not a great talker by anyone's standard, but it was better than nothing. I must concur with this observation. Kyuubi admitted, your judgment exceeds my own. Unlike his previous self, this Kyuubi has no reorganization of such things as pride or humility. Truth is truth, and nothing more. If someone else had seen the truth, then he would simply accept it and learn from it. This is how Kyuubi and Naruto operated. 2 machines in human skin. However, you could make use of my other persona. The fox piped up again as the Wutai squad moved closer for the kill, not realizing that they have already been discovered. Naruto shook his head. It seems that when his body was subjected to Mako, the powerful poisonous effect of the energy source not only dulled the fox's emotions, but also actually created a second persona within the fox's mind, one that could be called upon any time for Naruto, or the Kyuubi to use. However, there are drawbacks. The fox's second persona, deemed by both Naruto and the Kyuubi as the Dark Kyuubi, is the manifestation of all the fox's negative feelings, such as anger and hatred, only intensified 100 times, making it a literal berserker. When it is summoned into battle, Naruto is granted strength, speed, and stamina far exceeding what most human, save for a selected few, is capable of. Keep in mind he is 8 years old, but more importantly, he is granted a regeneration rate that made all but the strongest Karaga a joke by comparison. If the wound is not fatal within the first second, his regeneration ability can heal it beyond a trace. Of course, such powers come with a price. Should Naruto call upon the aid of the Dark Kyuubi, he will turn into a mindless god of destruction, recognizing neither friend or foe, until every single living thing within a kilometer's radius have been wiped out from the surface of the planet. With his augmented powers and near unlimited mana supply, Naruto could very well accomplish that feat. The last time he had called upon the Dark Demon, it was not until Sephiroth himself had arrived on the scene that his mindless rampage ceased. Since then, Naruto had managed to keep the creature at bay. If I do that, he told Kyuubi, it would attract far more attention than if I use a spell. Agreed. The Kyuubi nodded sagely in the confines of Naruto's mind. He knew better than anyone what his dark side is capable of. Very well, then let us observe this battle as it plays out. And so the two watched, as below them, 2 opposing sides got ready to fight. Zack swore as he dodged the shuriken thrown at him. Granted, the thing would not have done too much damage even if it does hit, but that is a moot point since Zack did not want to get hit. It ruined his reputation, and besides, shuriken scars are hell to fix. With a well-placed swing of his enormous Buster Sword, Zack shattered the offending shuriken. As the piece fell scattered to the ground, Zack turned back to face his opponent, a superior smirk upon his handsome features. Oops, did I hit too hard? He taunted as he leaned the sword against his shoulder. Well, that cheap piece of junk couldn't have cost too much, right? His enemy, on the other hand, was livid. The man before him had not only insulted his weapon, he had insulted the Wutai warrior's pride. The soldier will not live to tell the tale, the Wutai warrior decided darkly as he watched his foe, like the graceful hawk, stalking its prey. Tell me, boy, he growled as he begins to work a series of hand gestures. Normally, a spell is cast via an incantation, but through trials and error, the people of Wutai had discovered a different way of spellcasting, mainly thorough rapid hand movements. While this method takes much longer, it does give them an element of surprise, something that had again and again given the Wutai soldiers the upper edge in battle. After all, no one can defend against something that they cannot see coming. What is your name? The warrior asked, stalling for time. Zack smirked as he noticed the warrior's action. Did the man take him to be a fool? Zack and the other combatants have been thoroughly warned of Wutai's ability to cast silent spells, and Zack did not get to where he is today by disregarding orders. True, his rebellious nature and his carefree, almost flirty persona had often set him against his mentors, but when it comes down to it, Zack is still a brilliant soldier. Because unlike other people, Zack knows when to follow his orders. With that he charged at the surprised Wutai, kneeing the man in the stomach. The hand seals broke midway through, and an explosion erupted from where the Wutai ninja stood. Zack was able to foresee this, and raised up his Buster Sword like a shield, defending himself from the torrent of raging flame. For a failed fire spell, this one packs a lot of punch. The user of this spell, however, is not quite so luck. Caught in the origin of the burning inferno, the man had been burned to a crisp. Normally, Zack would have found this rather humorous, if not for the fact that he had discovered that at this moment in time, he, Zack the third-class soldier, is in very deep doo-doo. The spell was a Faraga, and although it was far from being completed, the resulting fire still managed to set half the woods aflame. Now everything within half a kilometer radius burned like the deepest pits of hell. He was royally screwed, thought a dejected Zack. His body may surpass that of a normal human, but in this kind of magic-enhanced fire, he could last 20 minutes, tops. And from the look of things, he'd be hard-pressed for time if he made a run for it. Why did he not learn any magic? Zack mourned, as he got ready to run, his Buster Sword abandoned. He didn't want to leave his best buddy behind, but there was no choice. Hell, if he make it out of this alive, Zack would make a point to learn every water spell in existence. Unless he was drowning, which means he'd have to learn Earth spell, but then if he was caught in an earthquake, gah. Deciding that planning is not his forte, Zack gritted his teeth and was just about to take his first step, when a cold voice sounded above him. Watera. A sudden torrential rainstorm gathered above Zack's head, dousing everything within its reach with a torrential downpour. Though to Zack, it seemed like the storm had been a godsend. Thanks, Zack yelled to the trees, for that is where he had sensed the presence of the one that had used the water spell. His cheers stopped when he felt the point of a blade pressing against his back, and the same impassive voice sounded near his ears. Are you really a soldier, to allow your guard down after a possible foe had revealed himself to you? The voice held just the barest hint of annoyance, though Zack was not paying the closest attention to it at the moment. So, you are my enemy? He asked, trying to see who it was that held him hostage. From the way the voice sounded, whoever it was, they did not hit puberty. He could just die if his fear came true. God, he'd be the laughing stock of every soldier he had ever known, and most of those who he had yet to make acquaintance with. Unfortunately, the gods above took no pity in the poor soldier, and he soon found himself face to face with a boy of about 8. In the boy's right hand was a sword of 6 feet in length, and one that looked awfully familiar. Of course, Zack is far too concerned with other matters, such as his permanently ruined reputation as a warrior. Heavens above, no girl would ever want to go out with him when word gets out about this. The boy spoke again, this time his words caught Zack's complete and undivided attention, all matters of the fairer temporarily forgotten. I have no time to waste with a rookie like you. The boy sighed as he drew back his sword. Commander Sephiroth is expecting me soon. Both of Zack's eyebrows shot up as far as they would go, and his eyes widened to the size of 2 saucers. You know Sephiroth? He exclaimed in a state of shock. Hell, he would have been less surprised if Darth Vader himself had dropped in and announced that Zack is in reality his biological son. Of course, Zack's reaction is not unexpected, since he had practically worshipped the ground Sephiroth walked on for God only knows how long. One might even say that our third-class soldier harbors an unhealthy obsession towards the soldier commander. Nothing dirty, mind, so get your head out of the gutter. The boy nodded, not at all surprised at seeing the reaction. Most people seem to acted like that when Sephiroth's name is mentioned. It was only natural, Naruto supposed. In this world, people worshipped power, and by all terms and definition, Sephiroth is power incarnated. Naruto had seen with his own eyes when Sephiroth had sliced apart entire buildings in his wake, and in that moment, he knew, he could never defeat Sephiroth. No matter what Hojo tried to do to convince his young specimen of otherwise. So when Zack had raised his question, Naruto nodded absent-mindedly, his mind elsewhere at the moment. Zack's face changed from utter depression to exuberance in a second. Naruto was quite surprised to see that he had not injured his muscle from the speed of the movement. Can I? The 15-year-old teen stuttered a few moments before gathering himself. Can I come with you? To see Sephiroth, I mean. Naruto shrugged. As you wish, the boy replied indifferently. Hold on tight. And at the next instance, both he and Zack vanished from sight. Zack landed panting and shivering on the forest floor. Teleportation is not meant for normal human, he decided. The technique is still in beta, for God's sake. It does not matter what Naruto had said, teleportation sucks, a lot. He felt as if he had just drank 8 barrels of beer, minus the drunken stupor. So now he is left sick to the stomach, and if not for the fact that he had wanted to leave a good impression, would have hurled the entire content of his stomach. Go ahead, if you wish. Naruto observed the pale boy, and a rare look of bemusement flashed across his face, and vanished again just as fast. On the battlefield, he had picked up a few emotions. Not very strong, but emotions nonetheless. Now, he supposed, he is experiencing something called happiness. Not quite, from what I can gather. In his mind, the Kyuubi made himself known. It seems this temporary lit in your mood is brought on by his misfortune. Such humor stems from mockery, not the true happiness defined by your kind. Naruto nodded at this. The demon fox seems to be correct in this regard. Still, one emotion is as good as another, for him, at any rate. So he finished his sentence, enjoying the look of dismay he elicited from Zack. Commander Sephiroth will not arrive yet for an hour's time. Zack looked incredulous. But that means... A pre-verbal light bulb went off over his head. I could have walked here and still made it on time. Naruto allowed himself a secret smile before confirming the youth's suspicion. The specimen had never laughed before in his life. A smile is all that displayed his elated mood, and nothing more. Yes, an ear-piercing scream of, "Damn you," could soon be heard reverberating all through the woodland. Elsewhere, Sephiroth looked up from the middle of the battle he is currently engaged in. I could sworn I have detected a noise not too far off. The soldier commander muttered to himself, before ignoring the sound and went back to the slaughter. Their swords clashed, and Naruto felt himself being pushed back. He was right. Physically, the 15-year-old boy is stronger, but he is raw, unpolished, and is no match for Naruto skill-wise. Which, incidentally, is why they are locked in a stalemate at this moment, with neither side gaining an advantage over the other. Zack had, after being bored shitless from waiting for Sephiroth, had decided to challenge his idol's pupil to a duel. He had wanted to see just how strong the kid was, training under the greatest swordsman of all time. He had not expected for the match to end in stalemate. Zack had not made soldier by being weak, after all, and he took some pride in his own abilities in combat. But in the face of Naruto, his combat prowess is all but laughable. He knew all too well that the only reason he is tying with Naruto right now is due to the fact that at age 8, Naruto is physically weak. Each of his sword swing could do little damage, even if Zack had allowed himself to be hit. But what Naruto lacked in strength, he made it up with his inhuman skills. Each and every blow is aimed at a vital spot, with the intention to kill. If Naruto is able to pack enough force behind each of his strike, Zack would doubtlessly have fallen 100 times over, which happened to be the number of blow Naruto had dealt with his enormous Nodashi. Zack had honestly no idea why the kid had allowed himself to be drawn into a match like this. From what he could read of Naruto's expression, the blonde kid knew the outcome of the match even before it began, and as far as Zack could tell, Naruto is not the kind of person to involve himself in an event from which he could gain no benefit. The boy calculated every move with computer-like precision, and reacted accordingly. Within a second's time, he could see 1,000 different possibilities in a single action, and counter each one with minimum effort. It was like fighting against a machine, one that could never make a mistake. Real machines can err, due to the fact that their program is dead, following a set path with predetermined deviations. But Naruto is a living breathing machine that adapts and changes in response to changes in the equation, and recalculates its actions according to such. Unlike a true machine, Naruto can easily accept alien factors into the new equation and react to his environment with ever-changing reactions. In other words, Naruto is hell a lot more dangerous than anything Zack had ever faced. Which brings him back to his original query: why did Naruto agree to fight? Did the boy wish to experience the euphoria of victory? Zack doubted this very much. If Naruto wanted to win, he could have weaved one of the high-leveled spells in his arsenal and blast Zack to Kingdom Come. If what Naruto had said was true, then even the forbidden spell Ultima is under the blonde's command. If it is victory Naruto wanted, then the boy would not have agreed to bar magic from this battle. But the boy did, to Zack's great puzzlement. Why? He asked as Naruto glided gracefully to another tree branch. Damn it, he wanted to scream. That is cheating. It was not fair that Naruto could fly and he could not. Seriously, how could you even fight against a foe that you cannot even touch? Why did you even bother to fight? I mean, seems to me like you already know what's gonna happen. Naruto nodded curtly at this insightful observation. Perhaps this teen named Zack is not as hopeless as he had first thought. I fight to test my strength. He explained simply. I wish to see how much my physical abilities have increased. Nothing more. Zack swore as he dodged another blow from Naruto, who sailed down from the tree branches and zoomed towards Zack, sword in hand. Well, how much did you improve? Hey, watch it. Naruto turned in midair, a feat that made Zack curse his own lack of magic. Holding the long katana in both hands, Naruto aimed the point of the blade at Zack. My strength is growing at an impressive rate, though it is still below my expectation. Perhaps you should speak to that man Hojo. At this, the Kyuubi suggested. He is a deceitful individual, but he does possess the technology to improve our battle capability. Naruto nodded at the thought. He disliked Hojo, even if the man had all but created Naruto. However, he could not help but admit that the man is a genius in his own right, especially when it comes to the augment of power. Naruto had seen some of the more immoral project Hojo had been working on, and had he any conscience, would have been horrified. Of course, since Naruto's situation is somewhat unique, he had only been impressed by the result. Some of those creatures could almost be a match for him in his berserker form. Wait, Zack suddenly grasped something in his mind. Does that mean I'm just some sort of test for your power? Naruto nodded in confirmation. He honestly could care less how the teen soldier felt. Well damn it. Zack mumbled something about overpowered brats under his breath. Can we stop, since you obviously found out whatever the heck you wanted to find out? If that is your wish. Naruto shrugged and leapt down from the top of the tree. As soon as he landed, however, Zack charged. Grabbing the hilt of his blade, the young soldier brought his sword forward in a wide arc, slamming the side of the Buster Sword against Naruto, who barely managed to put up his own weapon in defense, though the force of the blow still caused him to stumble back several steps. That was uncalled for, he observed emotionlessly. Zack grinned a feral grin. Well, consider that a payback. He chuckled at the look of confusion on the boy's face. Normally, Zack fancies himself a very easygoing person, who could rarely hold a grudge against anything, particularly against boys almost half his age. But Naruto is different. Whenever he looked upon the blonde, Zack did not see a kid, but someone his equal, or even better, in both skill and intelligence. And as far as he was concerned, joking around with his equal is fine. Besides, he was almost certain Naruto could have blocked his surprise attack, since he is the pupil of Sephiroth, after all. And like my teacher said, Zack continued, ignoring the annoyance glance he was receiving, all is fair in love and war. So basically, anything goes. Anything goes? Naruto found the new concept troubling. Well yeah, Zack nodded and explained. See, unlike a spar, where there are rules and things like that, in a battle, your number one priority is to survive. So when you are out there fighting away, anything that keeps you alive is fine, since there are no rules to begin with, and even if there are, your opponent is not going to obey them, not when they want to live as well. I see. Naruto became deeply engrossed in this strange philosophy and soon forgot all about Zack, who simply leaned against a tree and began to snore away. An explosion awakened them from the distance, followed seconds later by the sudden appearance of Sephiroth. Naruto showed no sign of surprise as he got up and greeted his mentor, ignoring Zack, whose brain had temporarily forgotten for function. Hello, Naruto. Sephiroth acknowledged his young charge, and turned to face Zack. Who is this? Before Zack had a chance to reply, Naruto saved him the effort. His name is Zack, soldier 3rd class. He said coolly as he followed Sephiroth. It seems he idolized you, in his own fashion. Sephiroth nodded. He was not too surprised. Most of the boys in Gaia, excluding the parts of the world where Wutai hold influence hero worship the silver-haired swordsman. Why should he care if there is one more? Listen, he said without looking back. There is a large gathering of Wutai near the city gate. Take care of them while I speak to the mayor. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Sephiroth seemed to have sensed his charge's puzzlement, and explained. It seems the city is home to a rather valuable artifact, one that our employers wish to keep out of Wutai's possession. Naruto said nothing, but sped away towards the city gates, which stood stoically in the distance. Zack, on the other hand, looked wildly about, uncertain as to where he should go. Follow me, if you must. A hint of impatience crept into Sephiroth's voice as he took note of the other boy. But do not make a nuisance of yourself. If there is danger, I will not be there to cover you. Zack puffed his chest a little. Don't worry about me, sir. I can handle my own battle. I am a soldier after all. He added with evident pride. Sephiroth only smirked at his confidence. Think what you will, he said as he begins to pick up speed. He did not wish to use warp, since the enemies that still gathered outside of the city may detect it. Soldier are not immortals, and you would do well to keep that in mind. Yes sir. Zack said cheerfully. To be reprimanded by the one and only Sephiroth is almost an honor in its own right. Hey, he'd bet 1,000,000 gold that no one else from his town could even met Sephiroth, let alone receive advice from the legendary warrior. The soldier commander could only shake his head, realizing that the boy did not pay a single brain cell of attention to what he had said. Well, he supposed the rookie soldier just had to learn things the hard way. If only the youth was more like Naruto, Sephiroth found himself thinking, who took in everything and forgets nothing. But then again, Naruto is a very special case, as Hojo had repeated over and over again. Forcing back a sigh, the two soldiers disappeared from the clearing. Naruto smiled darkly as he snapped the man's neck. He watched as the Wutai soldier fell lifeless to the floor. The man had been the last scout the Wutai had sent, and without him, the siege force outside the gate is all but blind towards his presence. Of course, he could have just cast a comet spell and sent these men into the abyss of oblivion, but Naruto had other plans in store for the Wutai warriors. The dark Kyuubi is hungry. Naruto could sense the restless stir of the evil creature within his abdomen. The thirst of the devil could only be sated by blood that Naruto is all too willing to shed. It was better to allow the demonic side of his prisoner to have its share of violence here and now, and instead of it taking over at the least opportune time. When Zeon had brought back Naruto, a thorough examination was made of the sleeping babe. Of course, Hojo had discovered the presence of Kyuubi and a study was conducted in its wake. Zeon had been correct about the creature, of course. The fox is a powerful entity, of that Hojo had no doubt. Not the most powerful creature, granted, but it could put up a fair fight against a summon. Hojo had hypothesized that the fox's strength is around the level of a high-leveled summon spirit. The theory was never proved, seeing as how the Kyuubi had no chance of free itself. But even Kyuubi itself generally accepted it. Of course, this is all a very roundabout way of saying that as of this moment in time, Naruto possesses a very dangerous ace up his sleeve. Not many people could perform a high summon, and although Naruto had established contract with a few high summon spirit, and even a sacred spirit, it was far easier just to allow an entity that is the equivalent to take over his body for a limited amount of time. Besides, unlike most possessions, the Dark Kyuubi has absolutely no interest in taking control of the body any longer than he needed to. And all he need for the body is to deal out as much destruction as possible. With a silent shift in power, Naruto's eyes flickered open, and a dark smile graced the normally impassive boy's face. Eyes the color of the deepest abyss gazed back at the soldiers, twin pools of eternity, devoid of any trace of light. They were the eyes of the demon that dwelled in the eternal darkness, eyes of the shadow that trailed in the awakening of light. Thundaga. A deep, maleficent voice rose from Naruto's throat, one that promised only an apocalyptical end. From high above the heavens, a single orb of lightning formed, casting everything around it into its dazzling radiance. For a single second, the earth stood still, as the Wate watched in awe at the ball of thunder hanging sinisterly in the silent heaven. And then, the ball pulsed a single time, and the gates of hell burst forth. A blinding light washed over the battlefield, consuming all in its brilliant grasp. Pillar of thunder, like the fist of some angry gods, slammed into earth, shaking the very city to its foundation. Again and again the sky rained judgment upon the earth, leaving enormous craters in its wake. Trees, grasses, and everything else were literally uprooted by the all-powerful electric field, before being instantly incinerated in the blinding heat and light of Thundaga. It was as if the entire battlefield had become the domain of some ancient lightning deity, awakened from its eon-long slumber. Hundreds of Wate were lost within the raining thunderbolts, and thousands more met their end as electric shockwaves rippled forth from where the lightning pillars had struck land. When the smoldering ash cleared, all that remained of the invaders were a handful of pitiful-looking soldiers, who had survived the devastating spell by sheer luck. Of course, these became easy picking for the waiting form of Naruto, whose mind soon took control again as the dark Kyuubi slid back into its shadowy retreat. It was rather fortunate that nothing other than better held the demonic presence's interest. Holy dollar hash, Zack whispered, having seen the one-sided massacre from afar. Behind him, Sephiroth allowed himself a chuckle. His reaction had been the same when he first saw the potential the boy had in magic, albeit, Sephiroth had hid his shock far better. Most soldiers are either masters of magic or physical combat, but rarely both. Each of the two disciplines required rigorous amount of training and focus. Trying to achieve a degree of proficiency in both areas had proved far too difficult for most warriors to handle. Sephiroth had considered himself one of the special cases, but even then, he had favored physical combat over magic. Naruto, on the other hand, may just be that one person who could strike a perfect balance between the two, although at this moment, it seems that the boy had a greater degree of accomplishment with magic. That is only to be expected, since his biological structural did not allow him to reach his full potential bodily. He remembered speaking to Hojo concerning the boy's artificial development, but for once in his entire life, Hojo actually rejected a proposal for more experimentation. Boosting the growth of the specimen artificially, the scientist explained, would severely limit the level of strength the boy would otherwise reach. And I do not intend anything but the best for this project, Commander. That had been that. Naruto would grow strong, but in his own pace. Sephiroth understood the reason behind it, and for once, it was a good reason. Accelerate Naruto's growth would give Naruto strength that he is not ready to handle. Growing up naturally, and Naruto would slowly settle into his ever-developing power. But to reach that power all at once, it would take away the chance Naruto had to balance his skill and his strength. Sometimes, power without discipline is much more a bane than anything else. Still, Sephiroth thought with a satisfied smile as he bounded towards Naruto. Even now, the boy is already a name to be feared. Come along, boy, he said to Zack, who followed closely behind him. There is no need for us to be here. And with that, Zack, the third-classed soldier, entered Naruto's corner of the world. The fate of the world was forever changed on that day, as the planet hurtled towards a path that would either lead to its salvation, or its final destruction at the hands of a foe it had combated so many centuries ago. 1 year later, Midgar. Uzumaki Naruto allowed himself a soft sigh of defeat as he waited for his friend Zack to arrive. It has been 15 minutes since the second-class soldier went to, as he himself described it, answer a call of nature, but the raven-haired teen is still nowhere to be seen. The 10-year-old boy supposed that the Buster Sword user is up to his old antics again. After another minute has passed, and after Naruto had absorbed another page of the book he is currently poring over, he got up slowly and made ready to drag the womanizer teen from whatever lady he is now surely engaged with. Though, as he had expected, he did not have to look very hard for the soldier, as seconds later, a rather portly man flew out of the bar, followed by a drunken slur of, "Take that up your and smoke it, biatch." Again the boy sighed. This was going to be a long day. A very long day. When Naruto had spotted several less savory characters got up and made towards an intoxicated Zack, knife in hand. Should we render our associate aid? In his mind, Kyuubi asked. His coordination appears to be hampered by the liquid substance. A rarely seen smile graced Naruto's face as he watched the scene coolly. No, I believe our friend can handle himself in such a situation. Intoxicated or not, he is still of the soldier order. Mere rabbles such as these will not pose much of a threat to him, I think. However, the vessel of Kyuubi added as an afterthought. If unforeseen complications should arise, then we may be required to act on his behalf. Inside his conscious, Kyuubi gave a growl of understanding, and faded from sight back into the chamber wherein the spirit of the nine-tailed fox was housed. It would seem that his aid is not needed, though an amused Naruto as more men were sent sprawling to the floor. It is fortunate that even in his drunken state, Zack had remembered to pull his punches, else a fate far worse than bruise and broken bones waited these men. The strength of one who could swing the Buster Sword in one hand is something not to be taken lightly. Naruto had seen Zack demolish concrete walls with his bare fist. Yet mankind is truly a foolish race, for even after the display of power, the more rowdy customers of the bar is not intimidated in the least. More and more they kept coming, despite the fact that Zack had laid them low with a single blow. Then, Naruto saw the dangerous glint that had appeared in the soldier's Mako-infused eyes, and knew that now, Zack was beginning to get serious. Which would be bad, considering that most of the people here are mere civilians with no training whatsoever. While Naruto cared nothing for the lives of these commoners, Sephiroth had warned him to keep out of trouble, especially since they are at the heart of Midgar. Just when Naruto was about to step in and end the fight, a new voice sounded in the doorway. The voice is young, and still held the trace of innocence that separated men from children, though it sounded oddly muffled, as if the speaker had some sort of clothing covering his mouth. Enough, break it up. There will be no fighting in Midgar. Into the bar stepped a Shinra guard, bright blue uniform, visors and all. In the young, for judging from the sound, he could not have been any older than 15, guard's hand, he carried one of those standard-issued guns common to all Shinra employees. Some of the men laughed and was about to continue teaching the drunken teen a lesson, when the guard fired off several shots towards the ceiling of the establishment, effectively catching everyone's attention. "Now, you good-for-nothing turds," the youth growled from beneath his mask. "I want no fighting out of you, do I make myself clear?" The men, now thoroughly silenced by the display, nodded dumbly. Drunk as they were, they still knew better than to try to rush a man with a gun in hand, especially one that didn't seem to hesitate to use it. "You too." The Shinra guard turned his attention to Naruto and Zack, who stood out from the crowd much like two herons would amongst hens. "Follow me." Not wanting to attract any more attention to himself, Naruto nodded and pulled the still disorientated Zack out of the door, ignoring the mutter he gotten on the way. Having walked some distance with the guard, Zack had finally recovered from his intoxication experience. "Phew, that was some good beer," he muttered loudly as he stretched his limb. "Now why do I feel like I had just been in a fight?" "Because you have." Before Naruto can speak, the young Shinra guard answered for him. "And a lot of trouble you would have stirred up too, if I hadn't stepped in." Zack regarded the youth before him for a moment, before turning towards Naruto with a quizzical look on his face. Who's the blue?" "Oh right," the Shinra guard mumbled as he struggled with his face mask. "I forgot to introduce myself, although I really don't see why I should, you two being criminals and all." Spiky, sun-kissed blonde hair that defied all laws of gravity broke free of their confines, as from a handsome face, a pair of cerulean blue eyes gazed back at them. "Name's Cloud, Cloud Strife." Cloud studied the two people standing before him with a cautious eye. These two, his instincts told him, are not at all like the ordinary troublemakers he had to deal with every day since taking a position as a lousy Shinra guard. "The pay is good," the young blonde supposed, "but the work is shitty, and there is absolutely no respect involved." "Right," back to the two offenders. The taller of the two seemed to be around Cloud's own age, or perhaps a little older. With a mess of spiky black hair and laughing eyes, no one could possibly have taken the teen to be dangerous, or even serious for that matter. The teenager wore a simple white shirt and fade blue jeans, nothing that would have drawn attention to him. He looked like someone that had stepped out of a sitcom, if not for the gigantic Buster sword strapped to his back. Cloud repressed a nervous swallow as he glanced at the sword. It looked like it could do some serious damage, if its wielder had put his mind to it. And judging by the numerous scars that adorned the blade, the spiky blonde would have guessed that the weapon, and its user, had seen their share of battle. But the other boy was someone Cloud could tell right then and there, that he should not mess with. The boy had similar blonde lock to his own hairstyle, though the spikes are notably subdued. His face, though still young, is already taking on a handsome appearance, and in a few years, the boy would be quite the heartthrob. However, it is the boy's eyes that unnerved him the most. Twin pools of cerulean blue gazed back at the young Shinra guard, twin chip of ice within which a pale blue fire danced. These were the eyes of the void, from wherein born all of creation, and to wherein the creations meet their end. These were the eyes of one to whom life held no meaning, and to whom death meant nothing more than mere words. Try as he might, Cloud could only detect the silver of humanity within those icy depths, the only indication that the boy standing before him is still human. Of course, Cloud had no idea that just a few years ago, even that hint of mortality did not exist. "Okay, listen, Mr. Cloud." Zack, still with some slur in his voice, addressed the young guard. "I appreciate you helping us out of a jam and all, but you know, time is money and we've got to run." His eyes flickered a little nervously to his watch, which read 15 minutes to 10. "Ah shoot, at this rate, I am going to be late for my date," the soldier exclaimed in mock horror. "Listen, Naruto, do you mind cooperate with this nice guard while I go and take care of some, business?" "Another one?" Naruto asked in mild annoyance, though his face is still the same emotionless mask. "I have told you, do not allow your personal life interfere with our mission." Zack rolled his eyes with exasperation. You are too young to understand the meaning of the word love, or what a noble, beautiful concept it is. Why, in a few years, you'll be glad I had set a good example for you, my little friend," he said with great enthusiasm as he thumped the younger boy on the back. Naruto was about to retort, when an angry Cloud broke through their argument. "Look, you two, you can argue all you want once we get to Shinra, but until then." Zack fixed Cloud with a curious stare. "Shinra Corp. Why would we want to go there? We just came out of it." It was Cloud's turn to be shocked. "You returned from there, how?" the surprised young man asked. "One thing is for sure, if these two actually got out of Shinra alive, then they are not criminals. No one could get out of that place alive, if the president wanted you dead. Which means that the duo before him is more important than he had first guessed." Zack raised an eyebrow. "We are soldier. Why else would we even go to that stuffy old building anyway?" he asked, slightly peeved that someone did not recognize his greatness, not realizing that as long as he is with Naruto, the latter would inevitably take up all the attention, leaving none for the poor Buster Sword user. Cloud felt his mouth gape. Soldier, these two? How could anyone so young be a soldier? The semi-legendary enforcers of Shinra Electric Company. Scratch that. How could someone so stupid-looking be a soldier? Now, the blonde kid beside him, Cloud believes. Those merciless eyes were definitely the eyes of one who had slew thousands, but this clown that got into bar fights for no apparent reason, why the hell did the gods make him a soldier? It offended every fiber of Cloud's being. Naruto felt he had to step in, before the reputation of soldier is ruined by Zack's tomfoolery. While he cared nothing for Zack's image, he supposed that as his only friend, Zack deserved some break. "Do not allow appearance to deceive you," Naruto stated calmly as he stared at Cloud. "He may appear to be a fool, but he is much more." Ignoring Zack's look of indignation, he continued. "He is a second-class soldier, after all." Cloud's eyes widened. "A second class?" Zack puffed out his chest importantly. "That's right. Not bad, eh?" Cloud turned his attention towards Naruto, who had stayed silent after his words. "And are you a soldier as well?" Zack smiled. He had so loved seeing the look on people's faces right after they find out Naruto's position. "Technically he is not a soldier," he began, and Cloud raised an eyebrow. "Since he is not registered in Shinra database. However, you, my friend, are looking at the equivalent of a soldier first class." At this, Zack paused dramatically, and if he could, would have had drumroll accompanying his next announcement. "And the prized pupil of Sephiroth himself." Cloud felt his jaw slacken. Zack grinned broadly. Yep, that's the look he had been expecting. Now his day is complete. Naruto on the other hand simply sighed. He had wished that his energetic friend would not enjoy himself at his expense. Still, there are some things that the young swordsman could not help, Zack's personality being one of them. "Say, Sephiroth?" Cloud stammered. He did not worship Sephiroth as much as some of the other children in his town, but that did not mean the young blonde does not look up to the legendary warrior. Heck, even someone who does not idolize Sephiroth at all would have been struck speechless by a revelation of this magnitude. Sephiroth's own protege? Yeah? Zack was just about to start bragging, when a sinister voice interrupted the three of them. Well, from the shadows of one of the rundown buildings, 70 or so Wutai ninjas stepped into the sunlight. How unexpected. We had thought that we'd take out a foolish soldier whose mouth is too big for his head, but to have the great Sephiroth join us is a pleasure we have not had. The one who had spoken, a ninja dressed in an elaborate battle costume, spoke. His face contorted into a snarl as the name of Sephiroth was mentioned. It was obvious to all the depth of hatred that the ninja bore for the great commander. The leader would surely reward us beyond our dreams. And then, the ninjas struck. Naruto smiled as he summoned his Muramasa, a very useful technique he had learned from his mentor. Carrying a nodashi such as his needlessly waste strength, it is better to store the weapon in the nether region, and call it forth when in need. The ninja before him opened his eyes wide as the blade flashed once in the air, severing the man in two. Another, sensing his comrade's death, gave a wild war cry as he charged towards Naruto. The young warrior's eyes darkened as he dodged the wild swing and using his free hand, gave the Wutai a painful blow to the ribs. The Wutai doubled over in pain, stumbling back. Even as he tried to recover from the blow, Naruto was upon him, his sword drawing a silver arc as it sliced through the air. Not a single drop of blood was spilled as Naruto removed the warrior's head from his neck. Even as he stood over his second kill, a third Wutai leapt from his hiding place, a dagger flashing in the sun as he dived for the kill. He did not even scream as Naruto whirled, slamming a fire-infused fist into his gut. The Fira-powered blow incinerated the man in mere seconds. Using the momentum, Naruto followed up with a wild slash, sending out shockwaves in every direction. All around him, Wate fell like mere flies as the devastating attack made contact with flesh. Around him, Zack is swinging his buster blade like a maniac, blood splattering from every direction as the sword broke bones and rend flesh. Naruto shook his head. Zack still had such a messy fighting style, even after having spent a few months under Sephiroth's tutorage. On his other side, Cloud is doing an admirable job despite having no real training. His gun doubled as a melee weapon as he kept his enemies at bay, either by rewarding those who got close with a painful blow, or a face full of lead. Naruto frowned as he decapitated another man. These shinobis are becoming an annoyance. Though they had no hope in the world of defeating him, again and again they threw themselves at the blonde, like moths to flame. With lightning speed, he slammed the hilt of his blade against one of the Wutai, dazing him. As the man bent over from the pain, Naruto warped his hand around the man's windpipe. Electric currents surged from his fingers, ending the man's life cleanly. Sadly, this act of power did not discourage his attackers, but rather fueled their fury as more and more Wutai began to direct their focus upon the youngest of the trio, the other two forgotten. Naruto watched quietly as the sea of Wutai surrounded him. He needed to put an end to his quickly. He could still catch the sight of the leader of this group, and judging from the look of fear in the man's eyes, he was about to run for it. Naruto knew that Shinra would want to question the man. The fact that so many Wutai could have gotten into the city is troubling indeed. With a single bound, Naruto shot over the heads of his would-be attackers, yet to their surprise, the boy did not land, but stayed afloat in the air. By now, Naruto had all but mastered the art of flight like his mentor, even if his speed still needed working. Turning to face the throng of faces, Naruto again smiled a rare smile, though a humorless one. A ball of lightning cackled in his palm as he directed it towards the assailants. Thunder, he whispered, and watched coldly as the sphere of thunder sailed into the crowd. An explosion resulted as the sphere made contact with the bare earth, followed by screams of pure agony that were soon drowned out by the roar of electricity as it blossomed into life. As the occasional spark dissipated harmlessly, only the leader remained, the rest having been turned to nothing more than bits of charred flesh. With a loud curse, the man fled, his form all but a blur as he made his escape. "Stay here," Naruto commanded in a cold tone to Cloud and Zack, before turning and took flight towards the direction in which the Wutai had fled. His form soon nothing but a speck in the distance. "You have nowhere to run, Wutai," Naruto said coldly as he watched the man edging back against the railing. The two of them now stood atop a 100-story building overlooking an empty construction site. The Wutai's escapade had taken him as far as here, at the edge of Midgar, before Naruto had caught up to him. "Give up, or I shall be forced to resort to more drastic measures." "In your dreams, freak," the Wutai growled as he pulled out a dagger from his belt. Naruto raised his own blade as he readied himself for the fight. "I'd rather die than becoming the prisoner of Shinra." And with that, the man placed the dagger's hilt in his mouth, and jumped. Naruto did not express his surprise, but followed a fraction of a second later. Upon reaching the railing, he threw his sword down, the sharp blade scoring against the man's shoulder, causing him to hiss in pain, though it did not dislodge the knife. With a dull thud, the sword passed the Wutai and buried itself deep into the brown earth below. Even as it landed, Naruto had dived after the man. Pressing his arms and legs together, he dropped like a speeding bullet, overtaking the surprised Wutai with ease. The fact that Naruto had perfect mastery over the element of wind did help matter as well. Flashing the man another of his rare smile, Naruto passed the startled ninja. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just overtaken a helpless prey. At 50 feet above ground, Naruto twisted in the air, so that he now fell parallel to the earth, with his back facing the ground. Pressing his legs against his chest, the young swordsman pushed off against the building, launching himself in another direction, his right hand extending forward, as though to grasp something unseen. As he sailed over the buried sword, his fingers wrapped around the hilt, pulling the blade free of its earthy confines. Ending with a graceful flip, Naruto landed harmless on the ground with sword in hand as he waited for the wutai. The wutai landed with a thump, his injured shoulder causing the man to growl in pain. As he tried to escape via another route, Naruto stood before him. "You have lost." The boy spoke calmly, as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. With a snarl of rage, the wutai's hand shot up, and would have scored a heavy blow had not Naruto stepped away at the last second. Taking the dagger in his other hand, the man made a quick slash, only to realize in shock that his blow had passed through Naruto. An illusion? The man swore as he looked around for the real Naruto. But even as he was about to turn around, a voice stated icily behind him. "No," an after-image. The man barely managed to bring his dagger up and block the lightning-fast slash of the Muramasa. Steel and steel met with a resounding clang, and several cracks appeared on the wutai's weapon. The wutai cried in anger as he jumped back. "Damn you, boy!" he roared, and two fireballs appeared before him. Die! The twin balls of fire suddenly grew in size, turning into two gigantic fire dragons that towered above the clearing. With an earth-shaking roar, the dragons dived after the 10 years old, burning everything in their path. "Water!" The boy, amidst the chaos the dragons have made, stated calmly, as from the earth, twin geysers shot up, extinguishing the fiery serpents with a smoky hiss. Looking at the astounded man, Naruto's eyes narrowed. He was wasting too much time. He had wanted to bring back the man unscathed, but it seems that he would need to incapacitate him. It may be a few months before the wutai would be of any use to the interrogators, but that is their problem. The boy charged at the wutai once more, his blade whistling as it sailed through the air. Again the wutai sought to block the powerful blow, only to discover, too late, that the strike was a feint. Even as his knife rose up to meet the non-existent danger, Naruto's knee shot upward, slamming hard into the man's gut. "Gah!" The wutai screamed in pain, for the blow was laced with thunder element. Yet unlike the others, the man did not pass out from the attack. With a series of hand gestures, the man cleared himself of the paralysis, and attacked once more. Leaping high above Naruto, the man dived towards the young swordsman, a coat of blue flames covering the blade of his dagger. "Now taste the power of the wutai!" The man roared as mana exploded from the blade. Gauntlet! A brilliant blue vortex appeared under Naruto, which soon erupted into a single beam of radiant azure. The blast of the attack ascended the height of the heaven itself, parting the dark clouds that have gathered overhead, bathing the world in a cataclysmic indigo. When the technique faded, nothing was left of Naruto, not even atoms. Or so the wutai had thought. He did not expect the boy to have emerged from the catastrophic blast unscathed. Dusting off some imaginary debris from his black overcoat, Naruto addressed the man calmly. "So, a gauntlet technique, only those of high positions in wutai are granted the knowledge of such an attack. Even I would not have survived the intense energy of the attack, had I not known the weakness of the technique. However, this does confirm my suspicion that you hold important information on your person, one that my employer would very much like to get their hands on." His eyes glowed bright blue as the Mako within them surfaced. "Return to Shinra unharmed, or return to Shinra a broken man. It is your choice. I rather die." At the last syllable, the man tossed something to Naruto, which exploded into black smoke before the blonde boy could have caught it. With a quick arrow, the boy dispelled the suffocating smokescreen, but the wutai is nowhere in sight. He must be a very important member of Wutai's court, in his mind. The Kyuubi's thoughts mirrored Naruto's own. If he had to make such a pathetic attempt at escaping from us. Indeed, Naruto agreed. If he has chosen the gateway to hell, then so be it. With that, the blonde once more took flight after the running wutai. He had no idea, however, that this chase would ensnare yet another pawn into the game of destiny. 10-year-old Yuffie Kasaragi hummed a cheery tone as she congratulated herself on her brilliant escape from wutai. That place was so boring. Father would not let her do anything fun, she thought, her lips forming a cute pout of defiance as she recalled the memories of her stern father, who had always ruled the clan and his family with an iron fist. Deep inside the young girl, she knew that her father cared very much for her safety, But other things are preoccupying the girl's attention, like the sight of Midgar. The technologically advanced city loomed before her, a far outcry from Wutai, a place that seemed to have been frozen in time. Yet at the same time, she did not like the city. It smelled awful, a burning, acidic stench that offended her every sense. But even worse was the realization that the land itself is dying. Back in Wutai, the forest and plants, nature itself thrived, as the people of Wutai strived to keep the old ways. They were a people in harmony with nature, who took only their share from the life-giver and nothing more. Yet the people of Midgar are different. They pillaged the land until there is nothing left, and they gave nothing back in return. Her father had repeated this over and over, each time the subject of Midgar or Shinra arose. And now, they are even taking the life of the planet itself. The people of Midgar are fools. Godo had said roughly, reading over another report of battle. A cluster of idiots that sought only to hasten their own end. It was true too, if Yuffie had been old enough to understand. Ever since Shinra first began their Mako extraction program, all those years back, the planet had been dying. Monsters of the land, great fiends that preyed upon the race of men, had been increasing in number and strength. Large sections of forests withered away in mere years. The climates shifted and changed in patterns far too rapid, and Mako itself had become scarce. If Mako is the life of planet, then what could a sudden decrease in its quantity forebode? It is a question few wish to answer. The planet is dying, because her children are suffocating it. Miss Yuffie, thank the heavens I found you. From behind the young princess of Wutai, a wizened-looking old man appeared in swirling mana. Behind him, several more ninjas had also made their presence known, having been dispatched by Godo to find and retrieve his only daughter and heir. Raijin, she squealed in delight as she embraced the old warrior. The ancient shinobi, once the feared thunder god of war, smiled at his young charge. To his enemies, he might be a dealer of death, but for the young princess, he felt nothing but a grandfatherly love. The girl was like the grandchild he had never had. Raijin, what's that? Yuffie questioned with a puzzled look on her face, pointing to the outskirts of Midgar, where occasionally, a flash of light could be seen. Raijin narrowed his eyes as he stared at the place, and then turned sharply to the ninjas behind him. Take the young princess and go. Now. The ninjas, sensing urgency in their master's words, nodded as they grabbed the hands of an unwilling Yuffie. Let me go, you big lugs. She wailed as she tried fruitlessly to escape the iron grasp of one of the ninjas. I will tell my daddy on you. The ninja who had his hold on Yuffie stared at the princess impassively. If Lord Godo deems that my action is punishable, then so be it. But whatever happens, we cannot allow anything to harm you. Forgive my trespassing. Yuffie may have been about to argue or throw a temper tantrum, but no one ever found out. For that moment, a figure landed in their midst, a very familiar figure. Zanku? Raijin asked in surprise as he surveyed the beaten-looking man. Could this battered-looking man possibly be the same Zanku that had been hailed as one of the greatest ninjas in all of Wutai? If so, then what kind of foe had the power to crush the fire demon himself? Raijin? Zanku looked surprise, which soon turned to fear as he discovered the form of Yuffie standing a few feet away. Princess, what are you doing here? Never mind. Raijin, taking her and go. I will stall for time. Yuffie seemed confused by this. Uncle Zanku, what are you talking about? What's going on? She was interrupted when a voice as cold as the frozen glaciers cut through the air. You have nowhere to run, Wutai. Go. Zanku roared as he pushed Raijin back, before drawing his dagger and sought to confront his pursuer. He should have known that even in his best condition, he was no match for the prowess that is Naruto, but in his current state, he could not even put up a decent fight. He felt the sword plunging into his chest, and then he knew no more as his world faded into a bloody crimson. The child turned as faced the remaining ninjas, his face a mask of indifference. The sword wound he had delivered was not fatal, and the man would no doubt survive. Though given what he knew of the interrogation squad of Shinra, the Wutai would probably wish he hadn't. Who are you? His voice sounded mechanic as he raised the question. Before Raijin could speak, a shout of anger drew Naruto's attention away. The little girl who had stood behind the old man was now kneeling at the fallen Wutai's side, her face stained by tears. What did you do to Uncle Zanku? She demanded, still too young and innocent to know the concept of death. Uncle. Naruto's mind processed the information, and his eyes flashed a murderous intent. Then you are of Wutai as well. Your trespassing is a clear violation of the temporary ceasefire agreement. Such blatant disregard for the terms of the ceasefire will be considered an active declaration of war on your part. Raijin paled. He knew all too well that at this moment, Wutai stood at the brink of destruction. If they were to be brought to the point of war again, the city of ninjas will truly vanish from this earth. No, he cried. There must be another way. Anything but war. Naruto studied the old man's face for a moment, and answered in the positive. Very well, then you as the offenders must be put to death. With that, he attacked. It was truly a massacre. The ninjas were not at all prepared for the ferocity or the power of the onslaught. Many of them were cut down before they had a chance to draw their weapon. Once the remaining shinobis realized what had just occurred, they quickly formed a protective circle around their princess. It seems the child is the most important member, Naruto stated calmly as he summoned several fireballs into his hands. As if armed with minds of their own, the orbs of burning flames arced out from the blonde's outstretched fingers and slammed into several ninjas who had leapt into the air to attack him. The ninjas were consumed by fire completely before they had landed. Nothing more than their charred clothes fluttered onto the ground. Raijin closed his eyes tightly, not wanting to see the massacre of his comrades. They were like lambs to the slaughter, and the blonde boy before them was like the devil himself. Quickly, he mouthed the incantation of the teleportation spell. Gathering every drop of mana in his body, he knew that he had to deliver the princess safely, at all cost. Wutai can do without a few ninjas. Wutai cannot do without their leader, or the one person that brought him happiness. He was too late as he felt a burning pain in his chest. Looking down, he discovered to his horror that an enormous nodashi had pierced his heart. As life began to leave the old man's body, he could only gaze back one more time at the girl he had loved so before collapsing onto the earth. His soul fled to the darkness of the shades. I am sorry. His dying words never made past his quivering lips as his eyes were dulled forever by death. He had failed. Naruto stood amidst the carnage, his eyes glowing eerily. All around him, the ground were baptized in the deep crimson of blood, though not a single drop had fouled his clothing. There were only 3 people left alive as Naruto began to move, the unconscious Wutai that he had been pursuing, himself, and the girl in front of him. As he raised his sword, he knew that soon, there would be only 2. Yet when Yuffie gazed at the face of the demon that had killed so many that she had loved, no fear had shown on her face. Tears ran down her cheeks, mingling with dirt and blood. Her hands too were stained with crimson as she had placed them over the fallen figure of Raijin, the man who she had called more than once grandfather. Why? She sobbed as she questioned Naruto, who found his limb frozen, not with excitement, nor fear, but an alien sensation he did not understand. Why did his chest hurt so when he gazed upon the grieving visage of the young girl? Was he injured? Or did the girl possess some sort of power he had not been privy to? For once, the Kyuubi did not make himself known. You monster. The last word was hurled like a speeding javelin towards the stock-still boy, and this time the pain was such that he actually reached up and clutched his heart, as though it was the most natural thing to do. Why did he not use a cura? The boy wondered as the pain receded from his detection. He had used it for every other injury. Yet somewhere deep within the boy's conscience, he had recognized that such a pain could never be cured by any spell. With a deep breath, Naruto turned and sped towards the city again, leaving behind both the girl and the fainted Wutai. Though his face remained as stoic as ever, a close observer would have recognized the raging conflict that is even now taking place within the blonde. For even as he drew his trench coat tighter about himself, his hand is shaking uncontrollably still. Minutes later, Yuffie had been found and taken back by another search team, and Naruto had reached the heart of the city, where he once more reigned in his blossoming emotions. And as the sands of time flows once more, the gears of destiny slowly began its unstoppable grind. Naruto observed his opponent with careful calculation, his Muramasa, one, shifting slightly in his hands. Slowly he moved, circling his foe like some predator of old, waiting for an opening with which he could launch his assault. The battle needed to be decided quickly, a single strike to the vital point. At 11 of age, Naruto is at a serious disadvantage brawn-wise. Speed must be the deciding factor. With fluidity uncommon in the soldier ranks, Naruto brought the long nodashi behind him, allowing one side of the cold metallic surface of the sword to rest against his back. His right hand, which had been gripping the hilt of the blade, tightened. He could feel his muscle tensing as he got ready to strike, storing up energy for that one explosive moment, in which rests victory or defeat. The Buster Sword came crashing down, missing him by a hair's breadth as the young swordsman leapt away, bringing his own blade forward in a diagonal slash. As his opponent tried to raise the gigantic blade to defend him, Naruto had launched a roundhouse kick, the sole of his shoe slamming into the Buster Swordsman's knuckle. The man hissed in pain as he dropped the blade, and charged at Naruto with his bare hands. Naruto sidestepped the right hook with grace, a taunting smile hanging upon his face, which now bore an uncanny resemblance to the soldier commander Sephiroth. As he had expected, the superior leer he had donned had driven his opponent wild, the man's movement becoming irregular and uncontrolled, leaving a great deal of his body exposed and open. It was then Naruto went for the kill. His blade, which he had once again brought behind him, streaked forward like lightning, its point pressing painfully into the Buster user's neck, drawing a trickle of blood. Yield, the blonde commanded, his eyes unreadable. Or die. The Buster user gave the blonde swordsman a smirk of defiance. You don't think I give up that easily, do you? With that, the ground beneath Naruto gave away, and the boy leapt from the sinking earth. Though his face is still that maddening mask of void, surprise showed in the young man's eyes. Quake, he said, recognizing the spell. A weak one, but effectively utilized. You must have been preparing the attack the entire time we were fighting. The Buster user nodded as he picked up his discarded blade, sparing no breath. It had been rather difficult, concentrating on two things at the same time, but he had managed, though barely. Another few seconds of fighting, and the magic had been gathering would have spun out of control. Though to be fair, the Buster user thought in slightly annoyance as he stared at the bottomless chasm that formed before him. To call the spell weak is a little insulting. Not everyone is a magic freak like Naruto, who could pull an Ultima out of his ass if needed. Let's get this on. The Buster swordsman growled as he held the sword diagonally to the ground, its tip digging into the soft earth. With a shout he charged, the Buster sword dragging behind him, its point leaving a long ditch in the ground as the man ran. As Naruto's Muramasa descended down towards him, the Buster user swung his own blade upward, deflecting the otherwise deadly blow. Using the momentum to his advantage, the Buster swordsman performed a back flip, and landed a few feet away. Even as he uprighted himself, Naruto had charged, and the two fighters were soon lost in a flurry of blows, accompanied occasionally by the sound of slashing and the contact of metals. The Buster user gritted his teeth in annoyance as he tried to force back his younger foe, using his own incredible strength as an advantage. Unfortunately, he was not able to keep up with the almost eye-blurring speed of the long katana, and felt several times the sword scoring against his skin. Naruto on the other hand was not fare much better, as each time their weapons collided, the impact had sent a wave of numbness up his arms. It was only a matter of time before he would be forced to part with the taller swordsman. Again the blades met, and again Naruto felt his own sword jarring his hands painfully. This is not good. By now, Naruto felt the slightest twinge of annoyance burrowing its slithering way into his heart. Victory is not so important to him, but this infuriating feeling of continuous suppression, a trapped and caged feeling on the other hand, is getting to him. Since he had spent his day with a certain black-haired soldier, Naruto had slowly broken the shell of lifelessness that had surrounded him all his life. He had begun to understand the concept of joy and sorrow, the ideas of happiness and grief. But he had also come to understand the powers of anger and hate, and frustration. He could summon the great king of dragons, Bahamut, or he could consign this place to its destruction with a flare spell. But that would not do. This is a friendly spar, a measurement of his achievements. This is a test of his physical capabilities, and that is the way he will have it remain. Let's us end this, Zack. He addressed his opponent and sparring partner calmly, breaking the stalemate exchange of blows. Zack grinned at his younger friend and nodded. Feeling tired, are we? The first-class soldier taunted. But as he tried to step forward, he winced in sudden pain. Damn, looks like you got me better than I thought. Well, alright, we'll take a break. Besides, I got to take a look at how our buddy Cloud is doing. So have fun doing whatever you're doing, K. And with that, the two left the decimated sparring grounds. Cloud Strife is not having a good day. For the umpteenth time, the blonde questioned the wisdom of having Zack and Naruto for friends. True, as their companion and comrade in arms, Cloud had access to things forbidden to the common masses, and he was also able to hone his skill under some of the best soldier, not to mention Sephiroth himself, when the silver-haired sword master was not out on a mission. Yet having those two for friends also meant that his life was constantly hanging on a thread. This survival training, as Zack had so graciously dubbed it, is, as far as Cloud was concerned, created by a madman. For no one of sane mind would possibly consider put anyone in this god-forsaken place. The concept of the course is simple, like most difficult things in life. All Cloud had to do was stay in that patch of artificial jungle, about 3 or 4 miles in radius, for a week, and during that time, he must fend for himself in ways of food, shelter, and the occasional dangerous foe that had wandered into his territory. The key word being occasional. The raven-haired Buster Swordsman had said absolutely nothing about a seemingly endless army of bloodthirsty robots on the prowl. Then again, with Zack, you never get the full story. With a sigh, Cloud brought up his defender, too, and deflected an incoming stream of bullets. The Gatling bot before him made a clicking sound as it spent the last of its ammos, and then began to beat a hasty retreat. These things may not be alive, but they are smart. No you don't, Cloud growled as mana pulsed in his free hand. Extending his palm towards the fleeing machine, the blonde swordsman launched his spell. Thunder. Blinding bolts of lightning rained mercilessly upon the machine and its surroundings, destroying all that had been caught in its brilliant path. The incredible energy of the spell fused sand to glass and turned trees to nothing more than scorched ash. The robot had received the majority of the punishment, and now little more than scrap metal had remained. Unfortunately, Cloud had no time to celebrate his victory as 3 more robots, all heavily armed, stomped onto the scene, their cannons pointing warningly at him. Biting back a curse, Cloud readied himself, although he knows all too well that his sword would do little against plasma cannons such as those. But before the yellow-haired swordsman could formulate a plan, he heard several slashing sounds in the background, and his would-be attackers fell harmlessly to the earth in pieces. A lone soldier stood before him, wearing the traditional dark blue combat uniform, Buster sword in hand. "Zack?" Cloud called, lowering his sword in relief. If Zack is here, it means that he could finally get out of this place, in one piece. Zack turned to Cloud and flashed him an infamous smile, one that promised much trouble. "So Cloud, good to see that you made it." Before Cloud could answer, Zack had interrupted him. "Anyway, love to stay and chat, but we really have to run." And to emphasize his point, the teen jerked his right thumb back at the place from where he had come. As Cloud stared at the broken trail left by the Buster user, he thought he could detect some movements to the distance, mechanical movements. "You moron," Cloud groaned as he realized what Zack had done. "You just brought the whole friggin' machine army on our heads." Zack looked a little embarrassed. "Ah, come on," he said, trying to cover up his mistake. "It's not that bad. I mean, with the two of us, we could take on whatever they throw at us. Just think of this as an extension of your survival exercise." However, he did not finish when several very well-armed combat robots emerged from the destroyed trail, their mechanical eye whirling as they locked onto their 2 targets. "Zack, I fucking hate you," Cloud growled as he brought his sword forth. His words were soon lost amidst the roar of guns as the robots opened fire on the 2 swordsmen. "This is going to be a very long day." Atop a cliff that overlooked Midgar, stood a single figure. The figure wore a black cloak, held closed in the middle by a long silver zipper that ran the entire length of the wear. A hood of the same material, connected to the collar of the cloak, was pulled over the stranger's face, so that his identity remained an enigma. Twin chains hung down the cloak at the base of the hood, one on each side of the zipper. A third chain lay in between them, connecting the 2 ends of the cloak's collar, forming an upside-down arc. 3. From beneath the shadow of the hood, twin glowing eyes watched the world below him. This place was a sanctum to him, untouched by the hands of men. It is here that he could be alone with his thoughts as he ponders upon the meaning of his existence. Once perhaps, he did not question the reason for which he was brought to this world, once he had followed orders like holy right. But as time passed, as he had come to see more of the world beyond the lab in which he had been raised, doubt grew in his mind. So far from the laboratory of his birth can give rise to strange thoughts, doubts. Doubts about the experiment that had made him what he is, doubts about his purpose, and doubts about his own existence. Death, it seems, was the only reason for which he was created. He was born to bring death to the world. He was the sword that Shin-Ra wielded against those that opposed them. He was not unaware of this, his purpose made clear long ago, and yet he could not help but feel a strange emptiness, as though there should be more than that his existence should have a greater meaning. "This is my life," Naruto whispered to the silent winds as he continued to behold the city that once bore him. Although he could not explain it, the words felt hollow and decrepit. A lie. What life is there for one who dealt only death? He still remembered that girl, no older than himself. Kneeling in a pool of blood, with tears streaming down her face, she had called him a monster. It had hurt then, and it hurt now still, whenever he recalls that memory. Why does it hurt? Naruto did not understand. He had killed tens of thousands, his hands dyed red with blood. He had walked through carnages that should only appear in men's darkest nightmare, a carnage he himself had caused. He was called the Angel of Death, the Grim Reaper who took life with every breath. So why did that single memory stand so vivid in his mind? Those ninjas were no different than any of the others he had faced, yet the voice of that little girl pierced his very soul. Was it because of some unknown power the girl had placed in her voice? Or was it because he knew that those words spoke by that sinless voice was the truth? A truth he did not wish to face. Monster, Zack had told him once, is a creature born without soul. Its existence rendered meaningless, it seeks only to destroy. Was he the same? Naruto wondered as he began to walk away from the slope. Did he too lack a soul that made him human? Was he really nothing more than a monster dressed in mortal skin? Or maybe, just maybe, the pain he had felt in his heart came from a soul he did not know he had. Was that why the voice of that girl haunted him so, because deep down, past the Mako, he was still human? The thought brought a soft smile to his face, a temporary refuge from the pain. He had learned to smile more often now, his friendship with Zack and Cloud slowly melting away the armor of ice that had encased his spirit. He still had trouble laughing or crying, or displaying the emotions that rose from extremes, but he is learning and improving. Naruto. Behind him, a sudden voice spoke up, calm and soft. Commander Sephiroth. Naruto turned and acknowledged his mentor. The silver-haired swordsman stood a few feet away, one of his hands resting upon the hilt of his Masamune. I did not anticipate your presence. Sephiroth chuckled and turned away from Naruto. I was observing your practice session with that soldier, Zack. You have improved a great deal since I last saw you. Then he made a gesture of dismissal. At any rate, I have come to tell you that you are to accompany me on a mission to check on a Mako reactor. Of course, I shall get ready right away. Naruto replied coolly. Where are we going? Nibelheim, came the soft answer. And although none of them knew it yet, that small mountain town would change their fate in ways not even the gods could have foreseen. It is there that the destiny of the planet was passed from the ancients to human hands. Whether destruction or salvation awaits that world, became the choice of those that dwelled upon it. Several days later, this is awesome, Zack shouted in the confine of the moving vehicle, pumping his fist to emphasize the point. Of course, he was the only one that seemed excited by the prospect. Sephiroth and Naruto had, like always, kept to themselves, silent and composed. Cloud, on the other hand, looked apprehensive, his hands somewhat sweaty, the defender's sword tied to his back. Come on you guys, Zack said as he turned to his less than responsive companions. We finally got a worthwhile mission. It was true, in some ways. After the war with Wutai was over, there was not much else to do for the soldier but clean up the mess left behind. Being as they were a people created for conflict, such peacekeeping duties did not sit well with those legendary enforcers of Shinra. Turk would have been better equipped to handle such trivial matters. But now with this mission ahead them, things are beginning to look up. Mako reactors usually attracted monsters' attention, and where there are monsters on the prowl, there are sure to be actions. Calm yourselves. Sephiroth spoke at last, his green eyes cold and distant. This is not a joyride. We have words that certain monsters and shady individuals have been prowling around the vicinity of the reactor. It may be possible that remnants of the Rising Dragon faction are behind this, so be on your guard. If you get into trouble, I will not be there to save you. Rising Dragon Syndicate is a Wutai military group established several years before the fall of Wutai. An independent organization that reports to no higher power, the RDS have actively supported Godo in his fight against Shinra, supplying Wutai with technology, materia, and ultimately soldiers. However, when Wutai fell, the RDS did not disband, but became a rebel group that continued to resist Shinra's takeover attempts. Because of this, many Wutai saw the Rising Dragon Syndicate as heroes of sorts, and because of the high resentment that the younger generation of Wutai held for Midgar and Shinra, the ranks of the RDS only grew after the defeat Wutai suffered at the hands of their most bitter enemies. Although their members are mostly ordinary civilians with no real power, they have nevertheless managed to cause much grief for the average populace of Midgar and the surrounding areas. It seems that unlike Avalanche, the eco-terrorist bent on overthrowing Shinra to restore the planet, the RDS had no specific goal in mind. As long as it upset the order that Shinra tried to maintain, it was fine with them. For the past year, they have engaged in everything ranging from large-scale demolition to sabotage and vandalism. Bah! Zack shook his head with a laugh. Those prissy? Don't make me laugh. Though arrogant, Zack nevertheless had a point. While the RDS had terrorized the masses and had become a menace to society, to the battle-hardened soldier who had faced death on a daily basis and whose hands are stained with the remains of the monsters that wandered the land, these rebels are nothing more than clowns. So what if they killed a few civilian or blew up some public building? In the many years of Shinra's founding, human life were never very high up the list of valuables. Sephiroth smirked at the raven-haired teen's display. Even if the boy had just celebrated his 18th birthday, he is still little better than a buffoon. A powerful buffoon, but a buffoon nonetheless. A soldier is supposed to be collected, impassive, and reserved. Zack, however, seemed to be rather lacking in all these areas. It was some sort of miracle, or a divine joke, as Sephiroth is vehemently convinced, that the youth even made first class, let alone one of the most powerful first class out there. Do not underestimate your foes. The commander of the soldier began, brushing away a strand of silver hair from his face. There are reports of several high-ranked ninjas joining the syndicate, and if they were to show themselves on this mission, it could prove to be an undesirable complication. Zack grunted and turned to Cloud, hoping for a more receptive audience. So, Nibelheim is your hometown, isn't it? The blonde swordsman looked a little green as he stared back at Zack. Whether from motion sickness or anticipation it was hard to tell. He nodded, hoping Zack would drop the subject. Actually, he had hoped Zack would keep silent, but knowing his friend, he went for the next best thing. Unfortunately, Zack was infamous for his inability to read people, so Cloud's wish was not granted. Somewhere out there, the spirit of the ancient is laughing in the live streams. What are you going to do, eh? Cloud sighed and decided to answer. He didn't have to, but the Zack would just pester him until he did. It was better if he saved Zack the trouble. I guess I'll go and see my family and friends, that's all. Zack's sweat dropped anime style. That's rather anticlimactic. Naruto could not help but roll his eyes. The expression of exasperation is something he picked up from Cloud, and in his dealings with the Buster user, the blonde, Naruto, had employed the expression an awful lot. Not everyone expect parades and fireworks. He said softly, his voice cold and detached. Zack shrugged as the coldness flew right over him. He had learned to ignore the tone of Naruto's voice for quite a while now, knowing that the blonde did not use it on purpose. The experiment that had gave him unimaginable strength also destroyed his ability to produce even the simplest of a smile. He may be learning how to have emotions, but his people skill is still non-existent. Well, one step at a time. Well, I don't expect firework either, but I at least thought that he had, a childhood sweetheart that he could show off to. Naruto simply shook his head. Zack's mind seemed always to be revolving around the female gender, for reasons he could not comprehend. He remembered a few months ago, Zack had forced him to get some new threads, namely, the cloak he is now sporting. He had no idea why, for as far as he could see, cloth is simply something that human needed for warmth, and possibly to avoid breaking the law by running around naked. When Zack heard this, he had launched into one of his hour-long speech about how clothing is important in attracting the opposite, and some of the same. Thankfully, Cloud had walked in and reminded Zack that Naruto had not yet hit puberty. Then there are the stacks of adult magazine that Zack had thought to be well hidden under his bunk, but whose location are known to every soldier and Turks, most of whom would take the liberty of borrowing one or two issues when they need to relieve themselves. However, what Naruto had not expected was that Cloud's face colored ever so slightly at the mention of a sweetheart. It was surprising since Cloud was usually a no-nonsense kind of person, and Naruto had fully expected him to scoff off the comment. Zack had caught Cloud's look of embarrassment, and began to grin like a lecherous old man who had just gotten a peek at a girl's unmentionables. Well, Cloud, you sly old dog. Out with it, come on. I'm gonna need name, description, and phone numbers and address, old habit, sorry. Just ignore the last part. Cloud blush deepened somewhat, and the swordsman scratched his face. Well, it's not really a sweetheart, just this girl I made a promise to a few years back, when I first left for Midgar. At this, his eyes grew distant in remembrance, and a soft smile graced his face. We weren't really friends, you know. He explained, and Naruto smirked a little at Zack's look of disappointment. But since everyone was leaving Nibelheim to find jobs at other places, we started to hang out more often. Then just before I left, I sort of made a promise to her that if I ever became successful and she should be in some sort of trouble, I'd rescue her, well, something along that line. Naruto and Sephiroth were both silent and plain uncaring as they listened to the story. Sephiroth because he had no time to waste in childish affairs such as this, and Naruto because he simply don't understand the situation. Zack, however, walked over to Cloud and clapped him on the back soundly. Real smooth, Romeo. So tell me, is she hot, this girl of yours? He did not finish as the car came to a sudden stop and an earth-shaking roar sounded outside. What the hell? Cloud cried and was on his feet at once, the defender sword out. Zack had also drawn his own weapon and readied himself for an attack. Both Naruto and Sephiroth had summoned their respective swords, and listened for any sound that may indicate the problem. Seconds later, a distraught Shinra guard stumbled into the back of the carriage, bleeding profusely in one arm. We are under attack, a monster, he stammered before fainting due to blood loss. Again the roar sounded, this time closer and much more angry. Sephiroth turned to the others. Naruto, come with me, Zack and Cloud, go and secure the vehicle and the materials. This may or may not be a trap, so proceed with caution. Zack nodded seriously, knowing that the time for jokes has passed. Grabbing Cloud, the two of them leapt out of the car and headed for the driver compartment, followed a few moments later by Naruto and Sephiroth. A dragon stood outside, bits flames erupting from its nostrils. Its emerald body towered over the truck, which looked like toy by comparison. With a bloodthirsty war cry, the dragon swung his mighty tail and swatted away several Shinra soldiers that had shot at its seemingly impenetrable body. Then, before the soldiers could get to their feet, the dragon opened its maw and a blast of blistering fire exploded from its throat, consuming the soldiers whole. When the flames had died down, only ashes remained. This is an odd creature. It does not seem to be native to this land. Be careful of your actions, Kyuubi spoke up softly. The creature at the back of his mind had been silent for quite a while after the incident with the little Wutai girl, but had gradually become vocal again. Naruto was just about to agree and surrender his control to the dark Kyuubi when Sephiroth moved. The soldier commander's blade flashed out like chained lightning, strike with blinding speed at the monster's vital spot. Blood exploded as his blade made contact with flesh, and the dragon screamed in pain and fury. Don't be fooled by his appearance, Sephiroth said as he landed, his blade untouched by the dragon's foul blood. It is not as strong as it looks. Naruto nodded as he once more took control of his body. Mana swirled around his katana, and soon his sword became encased in ice. To imbue one's weapon with an element is a feat only the most accomplished mages would attempt, and it is a feat Naruto had fully mastered. It seems against a creature who so favored fire, ice would be the best choice in battle. Naruto charged at the dragon, his swords raised, its ice armor forming misty clouds around it. He jumped just as the dragon's tail swung towards him, and circled behind the great beast. With another jump, Naruto landed on the base of the dragon's tail, and plunged his sword deep into the beast's skin. The dragon screamed again and thrashed around to rid himself of this unwelcome foe. Naruto held firm, and grabbing the hilt of the sword with both hands, he began to run up the dragon's length, pulling his blade along and creating a massive gash in the monster's back. As Naruto pulled the sword out and jumped away from the creature, the dragon gave one last anguish howl and fell to the ground. Sephiroth seized this opportunity and leapt high into the air, and then brought his sword down, and buried deep into the creature's skull, killing it instantly. Before he could recover his sword, however, several daggers whistled through the air, and landed next to the silver-haired swordsman and exploded as they touched the ground, enveloping Sephiroth. On the other side of the dead dragon, Naruto swung his blade with a speed that made it invisible to human eyes. Several clink could be heard, and 3 daggers dropped out of the air. Show yourselves. From the burning fire, Sephiroth emerged unharmed, though his eyes were narrowed in barely suppressed anger. From the shadows around them, no less than 12 men had emerged, all of them dressed in the attires of the Wutai ninjas. In their hands they carried a variety of weapons, swords, daggers, maces and staves. Slowly they approached their target, and formed a circle around the two. Remnants of Wutai, how pathetic. Sephiroth sneered as he swung his blade lazily, causing several of the shinobis to jump back in fright. Seeing this, Sephiroth laughed. Such fear in your eyes as you beheld me, and still you would dare to confront me? You're either very brave or very foolish. Or perhaps a bit of both. One of the men gritted his teeth in anger. These two that stood before him, he would not forget their faces in 1,000 years. How could he, when each night those 2 demons haunted his dreams? He still remembered that dark and stormy day, when those 2 had descended unto the battlefield, like the angel of death who had come to harvest the souls of the living. They were cut down like wheat before a farmer's scythe, and their blood covered the entire battlefield. They were the demons that dwelled in the darkest pit of hell, evil given physical forms. Silence. It is you who shall perish this day, and atone for the thousands you have slain. He screamed, partly in righteous fury, partly in fear. Naruto chuckled silently, his mouth contorted slightly in his mirth. Thousands? The blonde asked as he watched his foe's face. Fear and anger are powerful weapons when used against your enemies. Indeed, I have killed thousands. But where 1,000 men had failed, do you think 12 could succeed? The same ninja roared as he drew out his weapon, twin short swords that had been strapped to his belt. Shut up, die. And with that, the 12 shinobis charged. Naruto dodged the swipe of a kunai, and slammed his fist into the attacker, who grunted as fire consumed him whole. But Naruto did not stay and watch as a second attacker ran at him, his katana swinging wildly. A sword user? Naruto thought as he dodged the initial strike, and then did something that shocked the man to his core. The blonde grabbed the blade, the sharpness of the edge cut into his skin and drew blood, but Naruto did not seem to feel the pain. Then die by your sword, fool. Currents of electricity ran up the sword and then through the man's body, frying his brain and organs. The man gave an unintelligent scream and fell backwards onto the ground. A simple cure later, and the wound on his hand was nowhere to be found. Beside him, Sephiroth was cutting down the shinobis like flies, his sword a silver arc that danced between them, claiming their lives with its blazing kiss. Only a single minute has passed before Naruto reached the last of the shinobis. Though the man had lost an arm and a leg, he was still alive, barely. His hands wrapped themselves around the man's windpipe. Naruto brought the dying ninja close to his face. That was rather a disappointing performance, wouldn't you agree? Naruto asked softly. He wanted to see the despair in the man's eyes, a trait no doubt given to him by Kyuubi, or his darker side. The man only grinned a bloody grin up at Naruto, and mouthed the words, "You fell for it." Then his eyes rolled up to his skull and he died. Now, banishment, screamed a voice as a man leapt through the trees and headed towards the 2 swordsmen. Too late did Naruto realize that the shinobis they had just killed were meant only as a distraction, long enough for this spell to be completed. Banishment is one of the most potent time and space spell, creating a mini black hole and sent its target to another dimension, from where there is little chance of returning. Just as he was about to attempt an escape from the effect of the spell, Naruto felt his body froze in his track. For even as mana swirled wildly in his hands, Naruto saw the face of the caster, and with it, the floodgates of memories opened wide. It was the face of Zanku, twisted by hate and injuries he had received at Naruto's hands. Why? She sobbed as she questioned Naruto, who found his limb frozen, not with excitement, nor fear, but an alien sensation he did not understand. Why did his chest hurt so when he gazed upon the grieving visage of the young girl? Was he injured, or did the girl possess some sort of power he had not been privy to? For once, the Kyuubi did not make himself known. "You monster." The last word was hurled like a speeding javelin towards the stock-still boy, and this time the pain was such that he actually reached up and clutched his heart, as though it was the most natural thing to do. Why did he not use a cura? The boy wondered as the pain receded from his detection. He had used it for every other injury. Yet somewhere deep within the boy's conscience, he had recognized that such a pain could never be cured by any spell. Again he lived the scene, as vividly as that day. Then a voice snapped him out of his flashback, and then it was too late. "Naruto, what are you doing? Move." Slowly the boy opened his eyes, and saw first Sephiroth, whose sword had skewed Zanku, then he saw the light of the banishment spell washing over him, and he knew no more. Though as his consciousness was stripped away from him, he could not help but experience a strange sense of déjà vu, as though some time in the past, he had been in a similar situation. Blackness, drifting, the old man smiled kindly down at the emotionless child, whose eyes are as empty as the void that existed before creation. Soft winds blew around them, gently stroking the grass and tree leaves. Though the child could not understand, the old man had an aura that made the child feel comfortable, a warm, safe feeling. "Who are you?" the child asked, his voice still as sweet as an angel, yet lacking in emotion. The old man chuckled. "That is not important. A better question is, who are you?" The child pondered upon this, his eyes frowning in thought. Then he looked up, and a rare confusion could be found in his gaze. "Who am I?" he asked. Again came the chuckle, not mocking, but understanding and kind. "You're the one who will save the world." The old man smiled and placed 3 small orbs into the child's hands. A green, a red and a yellow orb. "Take them, you will need them in the future," the old man said as he straightened up and ruffled the child's hair affectionately. Then he turned and began to walk away. Naruto stared at the village of Konoha wordlessly, though a soft smile could be observed upon his face. It was so different from the oppressing air of Midgar, where he had spent 10 years or so. The air was calm and fresh. There was no suffocating scent that lingered in the air of Midgar carried. Trees, something of a rarity in the technological city, blossomed all around him, a sea of greenery that surrounded Konoha. Staring at Konoha again? A voice behind him made the boy turn around. A silver-haired shinobi smiled and waved, his other hand holding an orange book. A forehead protector was pulled over one of his eyes, so that only a single black eye grinned back good-naturedly at the blonde. Unlike most ninjas who had passed Naruto by on the streets, Kakashi knew that the boy could probably destroy the entire Fire Country if he had wanted to. Possessing a strange power called magic, Uzumaki Naruto had already demonstrated the power of a kage, a very strong one at that. Perhaps even as strong as the fourth, before his death. When the boy was first brought before the Hokage, some misunderstanding soon led to a conflict between the blonde and a short-tempered Anbu. The battle, if one could call it that, was over before it had begun. As far as Kakashi knew, the unfortunate shinobi is still in intensive care. After that, the Hokage had sent away the other ninjas and talked to the boy privately. Though Kakashi did not know what transpired between them, it was clear that a deal had been struck, one that seemed to be beneficial to both parties. Then the Hokage had called for him to test the boy's power. Therefore, Kakashi had done so, under the assumption that Naruto was another one of those prodigies like Itachi Uchiha. Boy did he turn out to be wrong. Very wrong. Kakashi counted that spar, as Naruto had called it, the closest he had ever come to stare death in the face. It had ended with him lying in a crater, most of his bones shattered to pieces, and a single katana, one that Naruto had brought out of seemingly nowhere, pointing to his throat. Kakashi was beaten completely and utterly. At first, he was able to keep the boy at bay. Naruto was skilled no doubt, but his speed left a lot to be desired. The boy was fast, faster than some chunin even, but next to that of a jonin, it pales in comparison. Then an oddly colored aura flared up around the boy, and he had shouted something called, "Slow." A blinding white dome had covered the entire area, and when it cleared, Kakashi discovered to his horror that Naruto was now moving at a speed that was all but a blur to him, which of course, resulted in a rather bloody beating at the hands of the blonde. It was no joke, either, for Naruto's strength was only a few notches below that of one of the legendary Sannin, Tsunade. The ground where the two fought is still covered in craters the last time he had checked. Even scarier was the fact that the boy had apparently used no chakra to augment his strength. Being the infamous copycat ninja, however, Kakashi had become extremely interested in that "slow" of his, which looked like something that would be very useful in his line of profession. So later, when the medics have finished patching him up, he had approached the boy and asked about it. Naruto had told him that "slow" is not a jutsu, but something called a spell. It, the blonde had explained, slows down time within a limited area, causing everything caught in its field to move at a much slower rate. Of course, since those of Konoha had never ventured into the realm of time, it was rather futile for Kakashi to try to understand the principles of space and time manipulation. Nonetheless, Naruto did teach Kakashi a few useful tricks, and in exchange, the copy ninja had taught the boy chakra manipulation and control, something the boy was not familiar. Eventually, the two became close associates in their exchange of ideas, each able to benefit in the presence of the other. As time went on, Hitaki also came to know how fortunate he was during that spar, something the two of them never repeated again. It had been a Sunday afternoon, a few days after Kakashi had gotten words that he would become a Jonin sensei again. He had found Naruto meditating in his usual spot, the top of the Hokage monument, and like always, struck up a conversation with him. Soon the subject of strength came up, and Kakashi had explained the various ranks of ninjas, the missing nins, the cages and such. Then he had asked casually about how Naruto compared to them. Ever since the spar, Kakashi had the feeling that the blonde-haired boy never went full out during his battle with the Jonin. His doubt only strengthened after seeing the strange and powerful techniques the youth had at his disposal. Naruto had considered for a moment, then admitted that in his normal condition, he was probably at the level of a kage, something that had not come as a surprise to the son of White Fang, for he had already suspected as much. The next words Naruto spoke, however, shocked Kakashi to his core, and made the Jonin very careful around the boy for some time. Though if not for certain complications, I could destroy the fire country, were Naruto's words. Kakashi-san, Naruto frowned as he added the honorific, something he was not used to doing back at Midgar. Still, he had best follow this land's customs, if he wishes to stay away from needless trouble. Kakashi was one of the few ninjas Naruto had made acquaintance with, when he had landed in the elemental country of fire, and he had been the one who had helped Naruto to settle in the village of the Leaf, not to mention introduce him to mana, chakra control. While the mana level of these ninjas is much lower than that of a soldier, they were able to control their smaller quantity with unmatched precision. The timing, the release, and the distribution of the mana were made for maximum efficiency, with almost not a single drop of mana wasted. Furthermore, it seems because of such precise control, the shinobis of Konoha, or any other hidden village for that matter, is capable of doing things that even Naruto found difficult. For one thing, they were actually able to increase their body's limitation by conducting raw mana through their being, increasing their speed, strength and stamina, and unlike power-up spells, this kind of augmentation will last as long as the user has enough mana to sustain it, a permanent booster spell of sorts. Unfortunately, this means that techniques such as Dispel would be devastating when used against the ninja population. Since a shinobi continuously supply his various body parts with mana, chakra, and since the likes of Dispel drains away all active mana around a person, if a ninja was hit by such a move, it would continuously drain away his mana supply until he either close off his mana source, or until there is no mana left in him. Still, despite its weaknesses, if used in short bursts, this practice could still give Naruto an upper edge against a foe. Moreover, he would need all the strength he could gather if he were to find a way home. The only other person who had managed to return after being hit by a space distortion spell is a man by the name of Zeon, the previous soldier commander. However, the spell that he had received was an incomplete one, so it still left traces of itself behind. Using these faint traces of mana, Zeon was able to locate the position of Gaia, and open a wormhole leading to it. However, for Naruto, no such luck exists. All traces of the banishment was gone, and with it any way of determining Gaia's location in the vast space. While Naruto could just rip open the fabrics of time and space then hope for the best, there are worlds out there many times worse than the one he had landed in. Sometimes it is best not to push your luck too far. He was stranded for the time being. Ryu, for your thoughts? Kakashi stood next to Naruto, and stared down at the blonde, who was deeply engrossed in thought. Not much as of now. Naruto admitted. What is it you wish to consult me with, Kakashi-san? The boy was cold, too cold. He had reminded Kakashi of the Uchihas. No, not like Uchiha, the skilled Jonin corrected himself. They were cold in a haughty sort of way, acting cold towards others due to their arrogance and the belief of Uchiha superiority. Naruto, on the other hand, is cold in a way that suggests a complete disregard of life. There was no pity in his eyes, not hate or anger. When he fought, those eyes were like the orbs of death, twin pools of eternity that gazed back from the abyss. Even Kakashi had trouble controlling the tremor that raked through him the first time he had seen those eyes. Only a silver of humanity is hidden beneath those unnatural cerulean orbs. Well, just to talk, you know. The copy nin chuckled softly and leaned against the rail of the monument, raising the book to his eyes. Anyway, I won't be seeing you as much, now that I have a team to look after again. Naruto knew the concept of teams, but did not think much of it. Teamwork was important, but it held one back from gaining the true potential. As long as one relied on others for strength, he could never attain greatness. This is why in Soldier, there is only associate and no teammates. Besides, judging from what Kakashi and the Hokage had told him, these genins, junior ninjas, only partook in the most degrading missions in a so-called effort to build up teamwork. Pathetic, really. Ninjas are killers, murderers for hire. The sooner these children can understand that concept, the better. Pulling weed out of some old women's garden is never going to achieve anything other than make the genins soft and weak. How could Konoha expect their younger generation to accept their role as dealers of death if all they did was waste their time on menial labors? Congratulations, I suppose. His words were soft, but he did not hide the scornful gaze in his eyes. Kakashi shook his head slowly. Naruto was not the only one who held the current training system in disdain. He himself had often wondered at the wisdom of making genins look after stray cats when they should be learning how not to freak out once they were forced to kill. Psychology seems a far more important subject for these genins to learn. Who are they? Naruto's question reached his ear. Ah, the usual. Kakashi waved his hand dismissively, still absorbed in his book. Occasionally he allowed a perverted giggle to escape from his mask, an action that reminded Naruto surprisingly of Zack. Naruto shrugged. Kakashi was infamous for 4 things. 1. His chronic tardiness is legendary. 2. He was considered one of the strongest jonin in the village. 3. He was a jonin sensei who had failed every team he had so far. 4. He was a known pervert to whom Icha paradise meant the world. Interestingly enough, on a later date, when Naruto introduced Kakashi to something called a hollow sphere, a device capable of projecting extremely realistic 3-dimensional images, along with Zack's stash of adult videos, the poor jonin had to be rushed to the hospital for a massive blood transfusion. However, I digress. Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura, and Maki Nezo. Kakashi continued. Not a very promising lot, I'll say this much. Uchiha is considered a genius by most people, but he is too caught up in his revenge for his clan, you know, the Uchiha massacre. Naruto nodded. Kakashi had told him of the massacre, of which one Itachi Uchiha had been responsible. And the others? Well, Maki Nezo is an idiot at best. Kakashi sighed. He is the biggest prankster in the village. However, because his parents are filthy rich, he usually gets away with that kind of stuff. And I guess their arrogance must have rubbed off on him. That boy could give the Uchihas a run for their money. An arrogant fool? A rather dangerous combination, if truth be told. Naruto summarized. He would do well to quickly adjust himself, or his life may end well before he accomplishes anything of recognizable importance. Kakashi dipped his head in agreement. He liked talking to Naruto, even if the youth was many years younger. At age 12, Uzumaki is already far more wise and observant than most adults, able to zero in on the important details and notice things most people would skim right over. Many times the boy had provided important insights on cases that had even Kakashi baffled. Agreed. The Cyclops ninja grinned as he flipped another page. And then there is Haruno Sakura. Graduated with top marks, but from what I can tell, her chakra supply is downright awful. Still, with such limitations, she probably would develop an impressive chakra control, if time allows. Well, if she could get over her silly infatuation with that Uchiha boy. Naruto shrugged. It doesn't seem as though this team has much to offer, from what you say. Kakashi acknowledged with a sigh. A fool, an avenger, and a fangirl. I could not imagine a worse team if I tried. The Haruno will follow whatever the Uchiha said without so much as a second thought. Mizo and Uchiha is like oil and water, and the Uchiha is so bent on his revenge that he doesn't give a damn about his teammates. This is a KIA waiting to happen. At this, Hitaki Kakashi's face darkened, as though ensnared by some private memories he did not wish to share. Well, Naruto frowned and thought, while what you speak of is the likely truth, there is still a chance that they might surprise you. Coal can transform into diamonds under extreme pressure, perhaps these three can do the same. Then he smiled. Not a wide smile, but at least Kakashi could tell the boy is smiling. Who knows, I might even observe the three of them. It should provide sufficient entertainment. Kakashi chuckled at the boy's acid humor. Hi, the silver-haired ninja agreed. Feel free to watch, if you like. Naruto nodded and walked to the edge of the monument. Kakashi was already informed of his ability of flight, but it still made the silver-haired Jonin queasy to watch. Something about being able to fly without wings just doesn't sit right with the man. I suppose you gave them the usual speech, right down to the part about the consumption and regurgitation of nutrients? Naruto asked as he turned to face the ninja. Kakashi's single eye formed an upside-down U. Oh yes, I told them not to have breakfast. You know that's one of my traditions. They will hate you, doubtlessly. Naruto said, and leapt into the air. Though I suppose given your rather degrading view of them, the feeling is quite neutral in your part. Tenten's eyes twitched dangerously as the bun-haired girl's right hand came dangerously close to the concealed pouch where many of her weapons are stored. By all that is holy, if her green spandex teammate Rock Lee does not cease his meaningless screaming this instant, she will forcefully put the boy out of commission. Beside her, one Hyuga Neji, the prodigy, top student of his year is valiantly, but in vain, trying to block out Rock Lee's loud and moronic proclamations, a desperate attempt to save what remained of the white-eyed Genin's sanity. Currently, the boy's eyes are tightly shut as he debated with his inner self, weighing the pros and cons of listening to Lee's rambles versus sealing the idiot's chakra pathway. Oh wait, the guy can't use chakra. Damn it, Neji found it hard to think. Yosh, if I don't punch this log 500 times, I will run 10 laps around Konoha on my hands. The energetic Genin screamed for everyone within 5-mile radius to hear. Most of the people looked in a mixture of confusion and horror, before doubling their pace, wanting to get the hell away from the phantom sound, resulting in several car crashes, numerous ninja collisions, and other property damages too countless to mention. The perpetrator on the other hand, having no idea the public disturbance he had caused, continued his practice, cracking the wooden stake before him with his powerful punches. As a boy born with the inability of using chakra and thereby ninjutsu and genjutsu of any kind, Lee had only one other choice: to become a pure taijutsu user. Since he first set this goal for himself, the boy with the massive eyebrows has pushed himself to the limit trying to reach his dream. In fact, his sensei Guy, the self-proclaimed green beast of Konoha, had remarked on more than one occasion that Lee was a genius of hard work. While many a ninja may perceive the equally thick-browed Jonin as something of a moron, to gain his recognition is not an easy feat. Of course, having Guy for a sensei, especially with the closeness of the bond the two of them shared, it was little wonder why Lee not only inherited many of his teacher's powerful moves, but also rather abnormal behaviors that had been known to disturb even the most battle-hardened shinobis. Therefore, Lee went on his training, completely oblivious of his two teammates' intention on painfully subduing the boy. The killing intent the two Genins had emitted had completely flown over the boy with the bowl-cut hair. Of course, before their bloody plan could be carried out, a single poof announced the arrival of their sensei, who had gone to the Hokage's office to get Team 9 a mission. "Hello my youthful students. The Green Beast of Konoha has returned at last, and with a C-ranked mission, so all three of you may prove your youthfulness. Yosh, let your youthful flame burn brightly," screamed the Jonin at the top of his lung. Tenten's twitch increased in pace. Neji's hands made a throttle motion. "As for Lee, Guy-sensei, I shall prove my fire of youth for you." Lee, Guy-sensei, Lee. On and on they went, until the exchange of emotions ended in an extremely disturbing scene of passionate embrace as the two spandex-clad ninjas hug each other. Somehow, logic be damned, the background had suddenly turned into that of a sunset beach, complete with crashing waves. Neji could actually hear the screams of agony emitted as his brain cells committed suicide in droves, the image of tight spandex pressing against each other overloading their nucleus. Tenten, on the other hand, felt her stomach revolt and the need to hurl at the spot. Luckily, she had gotten control of this impulse and managed by sheer will of force to push back the wave of nausea. This should be made illegal. The thought echoed in both Team 9 members' mind. More than once they wished that this were the Middle Ages so that the two of them had legal excuses to burn the two green ninjas at the stake. By the time the two of them parted, the better part of an hour and Neji's brain cells had passed away. Finally, Guy turned to his two remaining students and addressed them. "This is an easy infiltration mission. We are to head to one of the villages in the land of rice fields and steal some business paper. I trust you are all up to the task my youthful students." Tenten inclined her head ever so slightly. Lee shouted something incoherent and pumped his fist, and Neji was Neji. Before they could head out, however, something walked into the clearing. Two of something, actually. There, standing before them, was the infamous copy nin Hitaki Kakashi, and by his side stood a boy of perhaps 11 or 12, dressed in a black cloak not unlike those worn by the ANBUs, though a great deal more elaborate in its design. "Ohio, Guy-san," the lazy one-eyed Jonin greeted, though his attention seemed to be focusing on a small orange book in his hand. "Kakashi," screamed the other Jonin in surprise and excitement. "How are you my hip rival?" Before he could finish, Neji spoke up. "Sensei, should we not proceed with our mission?" "Yosh, you are right Neji. We must proceed with the important mission entrusted to us," screamed Guy in his usual style, before striking one of his good guy pose. "But when we return, I shall challenge you to a duel." Kakashi glanced warily at the green-suited ninja. "Whatever." The copy nin waved his hands dismissively. "Oh, what a cool response from my eternal rival." Guy began to weep at his rival's hip gesture. "Excuse me, Kakashi-san, but your students will not enjoy the already 4-hour-long wait." From beside Kakashi, Naruto spoke up softly, drawing all attention to himself. Unlike most people however, Naruto remained as stoic as ever under those searching gazes. "Who is this, Kakashi?" Guy asked, measuring Naruto up and down. "A student of yours?" The Cyclops ninja shook his head as he flicked a few silver strands of hair from his eye. "Nah, Naruto-kun is a good friend, isn't that right?" Naruto frowned. "Good associate seem a more appropriate term, since I do not agree with certain behaviors of yours." Ignoring the shocked glances the two of them received, Kakashi and Naruto disappeared on the spot. However, Guy had noticed that no swirling of dust and leaves accompanied their teleportation. It was as though somehow, both Kakashi and the blonde-haired boy had vanished into thin air. Even stranger, the green beast of Konoha could not even trace the Charka movement. The Uchihas had always been one of the most prominent clan in Konoha's history. Since their rise to power during the founding of the hidden village of Leaf, the Uchihas had involved themselves heavily in areas of politics and military, going as far as to establish the Konoha military police force. As a clan that specialized in fire elemental jutsus, the Uchihas have been considered by many one of the strongest clan in Konoha, if not the entire world. However, their ticket to fame lies not in their powerful techniques, but in their inheritance. For each Uchiha is born with a bloodline limit known as the Sharingan. The Sharingan is a blood limit that lies within one's eyes. Once activated, the user can copy almost any form of jutsu and use it as his or her own. Furthermore, the Sharingan, the mirror wheel eye, grants its wielder incredible perception, allowing him/her to track movements of great speed, and even seeing through and reverses genjutsus cast upon the user. There are even rumors of other powers that lies within a Sharingan master's grasp, though the Uchiha clan is reluctant on confirming those suspicions. Opposition often arises when one obtained a great power, and in the Uchiha's case, it is no different. The Sharingan eyes become coveted powers, and there have been disturbing reports of various Uchiha members murdered, their eyes stolen. Furthermore, the ability of the Uchihas to steal jutsus has always been viewed by other ninjas in a negative light. Indeed, throughout time, the Uchihas have been called thieves and scoundrels, honor-less robbers who pillaged the hard-learned techniques of others without so much as a "by your leave" or "thank you." Such shameless roguery had been the source of resentment for many ninjas, both inside and outside of the Fire Country. As one could see, even the mighty Uchiha clan is not without its enemies, both within and without the walls of Hidden Leaf. The most significant of their opposition is none other than the Hyuga clan, whose bloodline limit, also a dojutsu, is just as powerful, if not more so than the Sharingan. In addition, since the head of the Hyuga clan also sat on the Council of Elders, the relationship between these two powerful houses are rather strained throughout the ages. The truly ironic thing, however, is that the destruction of the Uchihas did not come from the unseen enemies that the Sharingan users have tried so hard to balk, but from one of their own. 5 years ago, one Itachi Uchiha had massacred his entire clan, in order to test his powers, or so the now missing nin genius had claimed. Only one person other than the traitor Uchiha was left of the now fallen clan: Itachi's younger brother, a boy by the name of Uchiha Sasuke. Ever since his elder brother's betrayal of the village, Sasuke had pushed himself to the limit, trying to gain the power needed to exact his revenge. Yet no matter what he had done in the past 5 years, Sasuke found himself unable to escape the shadow that Itachi had cast over him. So he pushed himself even further, until vengeance became the only thing that mattered. So hateful was he of the older Uchiha that what was once a noble and righteous goal has been twisted by the dark whisperings of the voice of wrath. A black seed was planted in the young Uchiha's mind, a seed that would one day sow his destruction. As of now, Sasuke knew none of this, nor did the village that had raised him on a pedestal. As the last remaining Uchiha still loyal to Konoha, the people of the Hidden Leaf had practically worshipped the ground the young Uchiha had walked on. Everything was delivered to the boy on a silver platter, and everyone went out of his or her way to respect the heir of a mighty legacy. Yet at this moment in time, the high and mighty Sasuke was getting his pre-verbal butt handed to him, and once again, the haughty youth was reminded of the fact that he was not Itachi. Kakashi was toying with him. It was the one thought that drifted across the youth's mind, as he was pulled underground after performing the grand fireball technique. Damn it, if he was Itachi, then the stupid Jonin won't dare humiliate the young Uchiha like this. At the thought of Itachi, the sinister claws of envy and hatred once more ensnared Sasuke's mind. Even more infuriating, however, was the fact that Kakashi had brought along with him a boy of his own age, but one who addressed his soon-to-be sensei as an equal, and perhaps in some ways, a superior. The blonde who now watched the scene with marked disinterest was cold and aloft. It was though all of creation mattered not to him. He watched the world behind those cold and dangerous blue eyes, missing nothing, but liking nothing. The blonde reminded Sasuke of Itachi in so many ways. With gritted teeth, Sasuke tried to pry himself from the hole. He had to get those bells, he just had to pass this stupid test. There is no way in hell he was going to fail. He is an Uchiha. The survival training had gone terribly. Nezo, having tried to cheat in the exam by stealing the lunches beforehand, had been tied to the stake, his teammates warned not to share any food with him. Needless to say, such an ordeal did not suit the pampered boy at all, and it was quite a long time before Nezo had managed to calm down from his shouting, and that was only because he had ran out of saliva. It was only by pure luck that Sasuke had, to shut the boy up, offered his own bento to the Maki, who, being the spoiled prince that he is, had accepted rather ungraciously. This action caused Kakashi to appear suddenly before the trio, a thunderstorm raging behind him, and announced in a deceptively kind voice that all three passed. He then proceeded to explain the how and why of this exercise, putting great emphasis on the importance of teamwork, and the trio's own faulty traits that prevented them to move as one. During this mini-speech, Naruto had observed that of all three now genin shinobis, only Sakura seemed to have paid attention to Kakashi's words. Sasuke had scoffed off the advice as something that would hinder him, and Nezo obviously have the attention span of a nail. A KIA waiting to happen indeed. Naruto silently repeated Kakashi's words in his mind. Right, now go home and get some proper rest. Tomorrow we'll start off with some D-rank missions. Kakashi said and dismissed the gathered genins. Then he walked back next to Naruto. Seemed like they passed, he said in a conversational tone. I did not foresee this. Naruto admitted. It seems that the idiocy of Maki truly did work in their favor, if only by serving as a source of annoyance. Kakashi chuckled in agreement. Well, I still have some paperwork to take care of in Hokage's office, so I'll see you sometimes later. With that, he evaporated in a puff of smoke. Naruto continued to stare a few moments longer at the site where Kakashi had disappeared, and then began to walk away. Before he could get a few steps, a figure emerged from the trees and jumped in front of his path, blocking his way. It was the raven-haired boy he had seen during Kakashi's test, Uchiha Sasuke. However, the boy looked rather angry and excited at the same time. May I be of assistance to you? Naruto inquired, though the boy's expression boded nothing good. Fight me, was all Sasuke said as he threw several shurikens at the surprised blonde. Even as Naruto dodged out of the way, Sasuke charged towards him, fist raised. With lightning speed, the Uchiha jabbed at Naruto's chest with his left fist, which Naruto caught with ease. Growling, Sasuke tried to punch the blonde a few more times. Each attempt was met with just as much success as his previous one. At last, feeling tired, Sasuke leapt back from Naruto, panting slightly. Why? Naruto spoke, his face a blank mask. Sasuke said nothing as he charged again, using every taijutsu he could think of against the unknown opponent before him. Yet like his punches, his prized speed and taijutsus were as child's play before the other boy, who did not even move from his spot as he countered them. Sasuke could almost see the mocking laughter dancing within Naruto's eyes, despite the fact the two never made any eye contact. It was like Itachi all over again, only this time, Itachi seemed so much stronger. Suddenly, he was pulled back into that nightmarish world, when his brother stood amidst the flames, covered with the blood of his family. He remembered again those cold Sharingan eyes that made him relive the massacre of his clan repeatedly until he thought that he'd gone mad. Such painful memories aroused a fury within the youth Uchiha's heart, one that burned as black as the deepest canvas of the night. With a roar of hate, Sasuke formed several seals and shouted, Kaden! Gokakyu no Jutsu! From his mouth, a massive ball of flame was exhaled, enveloping the boy before him in its blistering heat. However, almost as soon as Sasuke had used this technique, he began to regret it. He had lost control to his rage, again. He kept forgetting that he was not facing Itachi, but someone who had never done him any wrong. Yet one look in those cold and merciless eyes, and somehow, the image of his brother seemed to merge with that of the blonde, until there were no differences between the two any longer. He wouldn't die, Sasuke thought in self-comfort. He had used a great deal of chakra behind the technique, but it was not truly fatal. The boy might suffer a few burns, but nothing life-threatening. Besides, no one would care if some nameless boy were hurt in a sparring practice against the genius Uchiha, right? Before he could answer that rhetorical question he himself had posed, a soft voice sounded within the burning sea of fire. I see a black aura surrounds you, Uchiha, one that spoke of the death and destruction that would follow in your path. From the roaring flame, Naruto emerged unscathed, his cloak whipping in a supernatural wind. His eyes, which were glowing a brilliant blue light, focused on Sasuke, who found himself staring into the darkness of creation itself. And yet, it is but an ember compared to my own. Slowly Naruto walked before Sasuke, who was still transfixed by those eyes. A lesson you would do well to take to heart, Uchiha Sasuke. He whispered, his voice death. Do not challenge powers of which you have no understanding of. With a blur, Naruto struck Sasuke squarely in the stomach. The raven-haired boy gave a grunt of pain, his visions blacking out completely. A sickening crunching sound could be heard as an unconscious Sasuke was launched backwards, breaking a great many trees in his flight, until it was cut short by a massive boulder some 50 feet away. Luckily for Sasuke, no permanent damage was done. Naruto had pulled back a great deal of his strength, or else the genius would have been sent off with a lot more than a broken rib. Naruto was still emotionless as he strolled away from the scene, his mind going over and analyzing all that has happened this day. The meeting with Sasuke he had not foreseen, but already his computer-like mind has considered this new factor, and prescribed a new course of action. It seemed obvious to Naruto that the quickest and easiest method in dealing with the Uchiha would be to end his existence. The thoughts of vengeance have taken far too deep a root to be purged out by conventional means, and there is a definite lust of power in the boy's eyes when the two of them had fought. It may be much better if the village was without the presence of this troubled youth. A weapon Uchiha maybe, but he is a weapon that would willingly turn on his masters, as long as more profitable opportunities could be observed elsewhere. Still, he supposed that it was fair to give the Uchiha a chance to redeem himself. The human mind is truly an amazing thing, and one whose actions could never really be predicated. Maybe Naruto was wrong, maybe Sasuke would turn out to be the savior of the shinobi village. Only time will tell. Should the thought of betrayal arise even once within Sasuke's mind, Naruto would not hesitate a moment in eliminating this potential threat. For such is the agreement he had made with the elderly Hokage. In exchange for shelter and other necessities, Naruto would protect Konoha to the best of his abilities, until such time that he has found a way of returning. The power of a soldier is something to be feared indeed, as elemental countries will soon learn.